This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. I hope I find you well this morning. Darius is first up on the inbox saying, James, please make it make some sense. And I think that might be our topic today, actually. The statistics, the numbers are extraordinary, by the way. The findings now veer from the obscene to the hilarious. Listen, I think we're allowed to just laugh now, aren't we? The gnashing of teeth is long past. The hopes that courses would be changed in time to prevent damage have dissipated, have disappeared. This line here, if you had to find a line that best sums up the absolute madness of all of it, it would probably be the idea that the overwhelming consensus among economists is that the impact of Brexit has been significant and negative, but not catastrophic. I know we are still here. But this line here is, I mean, if you think about the conversations that were had in the run-up to it, and I think even more fervently after the vote, this line here is, I mean, it's just embarrassing. Some of the downsides on trade have been partially offset by increases in migration. So regardless of what attitude you took towards Brexit, or whether you were telling the truth or not, what reason you had for voting for it, the idea that the increase in migration has mitigated the damage to trade is about as close to a complete condemnation of every single argument for leaving it that anyone could imagine. Should we? I don't know. Do we need to get the boring stuff out of the way? Do we need to say, look, that of course Europe's not perfect and they have economic problems as well, and it's various issues because being in the European Union doesn't make your country perfect. How do we know that? Because we were in it, and guess what? Our country wasn't perfect. But show me a problem, and I'll show you how it would be even bigger if you left. Show me a problem in Germany, show me a problem in France, show me a problem in Poland, show me a problem in Greece, and I would show you a problem that would be even bigger if they weren't in the European Union. But that idea, so whether it was migration or the fact that you believed the lies about the economy that prompted you to put your ex in that box, that line there, that some of the damage that would have been done to trade has been partially offset by the increases in migration. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. And we did briefly, didn't we? Do you remember, Keith? What happened to the tin? We went through a phase, didn't we, of putting, was it £1? Putting £1 in a tin, metaphorically speaking, every time I said the words "I told you so," because I was conscious of guarding against it. I get messages. Let me just find one for you. Here we go. Malcolm says the best thing about Brexit is listening to you cry. So that kind of mindset of people who think that if they hit themselves in the face really hard with a frying pan, and I wince and go, "Oh mate, don't do that." They go, "I love it when you wince." Bang! Smashes himself in the face with a frying pan again. Old Malcolm. Bang! All of the things that he thought were going to happen haven't happened, and all of the people going, "Well, it's a shame, isn't it, that you keep smashing yourself in the face with a frying clang." Look at James over there wincing and crying and trying to get me to stop. Clang, and on it goes. And I think that the current prominence that Nigel Farage enjoys in the opinion polls is probably down to people having become addicted to smashing themselves in the face with a frying pan because they think it somehow hurts other people. Let's own the libs. Let's own the woke. Clang, another smash in the face with a frying pan. 7 minutes after 10 is the time. So how do we do it today? How do we do it today? The other statistic that is hard to believe, and yet at the same time not hard to believe, is the one about support or the one about beliefs that things have gone well. And I want to get this one absolutely right. Bear with just 1 moment. That the number of people who voted to leave who think that Brexit has been more than a success than a failure. There's a lot of polling out today. We'll have a look at as much of it as we can. So get what figure? So Leave voters, actual Malcolms, clang, who think that it has been more of a success than a failure. People, I suppose, who consider who think that people being proved right about things somehow embarrasses the people being proved right rather than the people being... I don't know. But the percentage of Britons who voted to leave the European Union, who believe that Brexit, who currently believe that Brexit has been more of a success than a failure. What would you put on that in percentage terms? So here are 100% of Leave voters. What percentage of them do you think believe today that Brexit has been more of a success than a failure? In other words, people who think it's gone really well. Oh, well. It's 11%. So 1 in 5 people who voted for it, 1 in 5 people who voted for it think that it has been more of a success than a failure. And the sound of that 11% smashing themselves in the face with a frying pan still resonates across the island. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Absolutely extraordinary. And I'm not going to stop using that word today because these are extraordinary times. We find ourselves in extraordinary territory. So, I mean, the idea that it would go badly, or the idea that it would not be any of the things that we were told it would be, I think was fairly clear from the start. The idea that things would have fallen apart quite so completely, quite so quickly is, I mean, breathtaking. So 11% of Britons say that Brexit has been a success. 1 in 5 Leave voters think that Brexit has been more of a success than a failure. So 11% of the country, but 20% of people who actually voted to leave, which makes sense, doesn't it? Because you'd split it more or less equally. So it'd be the same people, just a bigger sample. So you knew that the wheels would come off. You knew that, I mean, today, I imagine, I haven't checked, that people like Farage, yeah, here you go, front page of the Daily Telegraph, Nigel Farage, the job isn't finished yet, which translates roughly as, there is a brilliant Brexit. It goes to a different school. And then David Frost, who, of course, campaigned tirelessly for Remain when he was running the Scotch Whisky Association or something like that, but saw some wonderful career opportunities in changing sides and ended up in the House of Lords. So, you know, it paid off for him. He's written an article under the headline, "Leaving was our liberation." And yet the people who believed them, or the people who believed Farage now, number just 1 in 5 of the people who actually voted for it. So I've clarified, stop questioning my statistics. I've already clarified them. 1 in 5 Leave voters think Brexit has been more of a success than a failure. 11% of Britons, which includes Remain voters, say Brexit has been a success. So that's the split there. I appreciate your attention to detail. I should have been a little clearer. And one of the reasons I have to laugh, one of the reasons I think we should joke about it, people like Malcolm notwithstanding, people who are still addicted to smashing themselves in the face with a frying pan, is because my mantra throughout this period has been contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned, as you know. The idea that there is something bad or even stupid about people who were victims of one of the single most effective propaganda campaigns that this country has ever witnessed. If you look at the gamut of newspapers, and it was kind of the last hurrah, wasn't it, of the era in which newspapers exercised epic influence: the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Sunday Times, the Sun, of course, all of that public discourse designed to persuade people to smash themselves in the face with a frying pan. So I never really blamed the ordinary voters who decided to do so. I blamed the con men, the people who do this for a living, who have a responsibility, a professional and moral responsibility to explain facts to people. And yet, of course, plenty of people who do what I do for a living ended up encouraging you to smash yourself in the face with a frying pan. Let's stop that metaphor now and go instead for the patriotic angle, to damage our country, the country that we all love. These people who retain positions of power and influence, not as much in politics as the media. The media champions of Brexit appear to have been completely untouched. The political champions of Brexit have mostly fallen by the wayside, or of course, I mean, received knighthoods and Daily Telegraph columns and seats in the House of Lords, but they're mostly not in Parliament anymore, except Farage and a few of the prominent Tories. But the absolute failure of any of them to face proper consequences is a much bigger problem than the people who believed them and propelled them into positions of power. I think I'll play you a few reminders. I'll do it after the break. I didn't realise this was going to be one of those days when I wasn't particularly bothered about taking any calls, but it's turning into one. So let's stop that now and start look at what I mean by contempt for the comment, compassion for the conned. Is are we friendly enough, do you think, for me to ask you, looking back now, why do you think you fell for it? I'd love to do a show on that. I'm never quite sure. It's worked sometimes, hasn't it, in the past? And then other times it hasn't quite worked. And we end up analysing how other people fell for it. But I bear you no malice whatsoever. And I do hate the fact that you've got the injuries still from smashing yourself in the face with a frying pan, because, of course, we can't overlook the fact you also hit the rest of us in the face with a frying pan. You know, the Daniel Hannans, the Andrea Leadsoms, the Gisela Stewarts, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Nigel Farages, the Boris Johnsons. They damaged all of us. They didn't just make the people who believed them look stupid. They made life worse for all of us in various ways. I wonder how many people still talk about sovereignty. That was the first sign of the wheels coming off, wasn't it? When they started telling us that the big win was literally invisible. The big win is sovereignty. It's what sovereignty? Do you like sovereignty? Can you feel the sovereignty around you? And you'd sort of go, well, no, unless you were still dazed from smacking yourself in the face with a frying pan, at which point you'd start pretending you loved all the sovereignty and the sovereignty made it all worth it. So we were supposed to get richer, and if you were minded to bring down immigration, you were supposed to feel the joy of fewer foreigners populating our health services and schools and various other areas of the country. And yet, one area on which everybody agrees, is that some of the damage to our economy has been mitigated by the rises in migration. The most fundamental demolition of all Brexit rhetoric contained within a simple single sentence. The damage to our trade would have been even worse if non-EU migration hadn't rocketed to a place that made the overall figures bigger than they were when we enjoyed freedom of movement between here and the European Union. So, 16 minutes after 10 is the time. Is it too soon for you to just give me a call and tell me what you think, why you think you fell for it? 0345 600973. Okay, only 1 in 5 people who voted for it think that it has been more of a success than a failure. There'll be some people who subscribe to the unicorn still. You know, there is a good Brexit. It just goes to a different school. But I don't know that we can have the same arguments again that we used to have. And you can tell me that we'll be able to trade with the European. I mean, Farage is going to try, judging by the front of the Daily Express this morning. He's going to pretend that there is a brilliant Brexit that only he can deliver. And it will involve all the same old lies. I mean, why wouldn't he try it again? His entire grift has been built upon lies about the European Union, so he can just start telling more. We'll be able to do this and we'll be able to do that. And the only reason why, do you know what he'll say? He'll say the only reason why things haven't gone well is because people didn't believe enough. That's surreal, right? That's surreal. The fact that you could come back to the idea that belief somehow changes gravity. Belief somehow changes geography. Belief somehow changes economic. Just believe more. If you believe enough, then you might, I don't know, grow horns out the top of your head. You just got to believe more, and you'll win the lottery on Saturday. You just got to believe. It's extraordinary, and there it is, front page of the Daily Express. We need people who believe in Brexit, even now, 5 years after it happened. such contempt for ordinary people that he thinks he can sell them another vat of snake oil. You just need to believe more. Feel the sovereignty. So, I'm going to play you some of the greatest hits of some of these characters shortly. I've only got 3, actually, because, well, that's my fault, because I didn't notice the date until yesterday. But why do you think you fell for it? No judgment from me. No, certainly no condescension. I reserve all of my contempt for the people that sold it to you. And in some ways, it's the people in the media who I think are most shameful and shameless, as opposed to people in politics, because our job is to give people what they need to make informed decisions. Or, I mean, how would you explain to someone who's just woken up how it happened? How did we become the first country in history to pass a democratic vote to impose economic sanctions on itself? The benefit of hindsight. What answers would you give to that question? Let's get the phone lines open. 0345 6060 973. And if you're really feeling clever, what is it that Farage wants us to believe in, do you think? What are we supposed to be believing in now? I don't think he could answer that question, but I wonder whether you can. It's 10:19.
James O'Brien on LBC.
You understand it's not an organ that I turn to with any particular frequency. And I saw a still of it, the front page of the Daily Express, and I presumed it was from 5 years ago. I genuinely presumed that this was like reminding us what was on the front page of the Daily Express 5 years ago when Brexit finally happened, and it's Nigel Farage saying we need people who believe in Brexit. I thought that's 5 years ago. That's today. It's 5 years later, the same grift from the same chancers and charlatans and spivs. It's absolutely extraordinary. Speaking of chancers, I don't know who your favourite is, but it's important to remember what we were promised. So here's Andrea Leadsom being interviewed by Andrew Neil in 2016, claiming I've got a particular, I don't know if soft spot's quite the right word, but for me, one of the absolute penny drop moments about how awful everything had become involves Andrea Leadsom and the former Director General of the World Trade Organization, Pascal Lamy. But I think I've told you that story often enough. Here she is. And remember, she's been made a dame. That's the thing about when I talk about the damage that's been done to our country. So here's what she said. You can judge it according to what's actually happened. And then remember that she got rewarded and promoted for her role in this. She even ran to lead the Conservative Party twice. Here's what she said, okay, in 2016.
Let me get this right. You're claiming that we could leave the EU, which will mean, because you've made a big song and dance about it, ending free movement of peoples. That would not apply to the United Kingdom, but we would still access the single market on the same basis as we do now?
We would continue to trade tariff-free because it's in their interest, even more than ours. And just to be clear...
So, let me try and get you to be clear, because it's interesting. On the same basis as now, we would trade on the same basis, is your claim?
Absolutely in their interests, even more than ours. We have a big deficit with the European Union. And let's be clear, the EU has some modest free trade agreements with the rest of the world, not nearly as many as Switzerland, but they do have some free trade agreements. Those countries trade tariff-free with the EU, and they do not have free movement of labour. So to suggest that the only way to access the European market tariff-free is with free movement is simply not true, Andrew.
But if Europe was to agree that there would be no price of membership for being part of the single market, there's no free movement.
We won't be part of the single market.
No, but you're saying we'd have the same access as if we were.
No.
Well, I asked you if it was on the same terms.
No. The single market has become a big totemic issue. We do not want to be in the single market. We want to trade tariff-free with the European Union.
But in terms of trade, we'd have the same access as we do now.
I believe we will trade tariff-free.
So if the European Union conceded that to us, what would stop Sweden, Denmark, Poland, other countries saying, we'll have that too then? If the Brits get that, the European Union elite is never going to agree to that. You know that.
Andrew Neil there, reminding us what he was like before his brain got boiled. But Andrea Leadsom, I mean, a question of whether or not she's got a brain to boil. And yet, let me be clear, that was part of how it happened. There's just this plausibility from people not overly blessed in the brains department, sounding so plausible and sounding so sensible. Here's another one, Gisela Stewart. I check this one out.
I think we're going to be stronger because our economy is strong if we vote leave. I think we're going to be safer because we've got greater control over our borders if we vote leave. And I think we're going to be better off. And we're going to be better off because the European Union was created in a time when big trading blocs existed. They don't exist anymore.
Sorry? What? Pardon? House of Lords. For her. Andrea Leadsom made a dame. Gisela Stewart got a seat in the House of Lords. And this clown got knighted.
So we could have cheaper food, clothing and footwear straight away by getting rid of the protectionist anti-trade tariffs that the EU imposes. And it would be very good for the British people and it would provide certainty. And I think once there's certainty, the country will begin to reunite.
Oh, go on then, let's do a few more from him while we're here. I think the last Brexiter that I actually got to sit down with and interview. 26 minutes after 10 is the time. Should we hear what he had to say about whether or not Northern Ireland was going to play a role in these matters? Have we got that?
Talking about the withdrawal agreement,
yes.
It is a Remainers Brexit.
What does that mean?
It means that it's shadowing membership of the European Union. It's half in, half out. That it would tie us into the common external tariff. It would tie us in via Northern Ireland to the EU's rulebook in vast swathes of activity.
And when people warned that the Good Friday Agreement would render that inevitable, why do you think they were dismissed?
Because it doesn't.
So regulatory alignment isn't in the Good Friday Agreement?
No, it isn't.
Okay. It is.
No, it isn't. It's not a matter of the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement wasn't considering those sorts of issues.
You don't think the Good Friday Agreement insists on regulatory alignment on both sides of the Irish border?
No, it doesn't.
Well, give him a knighthood, eh? Genius. He understands everything. Made me feel really stupid subsequently, because, of course, it was perfectly possible to have two completely different trade environments on either side of the Irish border. And then you remember WTO, the same clowns, telling you that we could... Well, just listen to him again.
I would be in favour of a deal, but if that proves impossible, there is nothing to be fearful about leaving on WTO terms.
OK, and all the people that say there's a lot to be fearful of, like the National Farmers Union and the Governor of the Bank of England and the CBI, you can see what they can't see, which is...
Well, the CBI's got everything wrong in its history. It wanted us to join the euro, wanted us to join the exchange rate mechanism.
I think that's what you just called a red herring or something, isn't it? So the question is, what can you see that they can't see?
What I would say is that you should judge people by their previous track records.
Well, I am. Why haven't you taken down that tweet from The Sun about what tariffs really means? Because The Sun withdrew it and it's still on your Twitter account, so I'm judging you by your track record.
Right. Judge away. The Governor of the Bank of England said we'd have a technical recession. Thank you so much. Fortunately, you're not part of the judiciary. The Governor of the Bank of England said we would have a technical recession purely on a vote to leave.
The question is, what can you see that they can't see? And you know that the Governor, I mean, this is so disingenuous. The Governor of the Bank of England dedicated himself on the morning after the vote to making his own predictions not come true. But you know this. You just know that if you say it in a plausible and persuasive fashion, people will continue to believe you, despite the fact that you've led them to the precipice of a no-deal Brexit, which even you know deep down will be disastrous. Unless you can answer this question. What is it you can see that they can't?
You're trying to get up to the adverts with an hysterical diatribe. I think
it's all right. We can postpone the adverts. What can you see that all of the people who warn against coming out with no deal can't see?
I can see what they've got wrong before and why.
I'm not asking about the past. I'm asking about the future. What can you see that they can't see?
The past is a very useful guide to the future because you can see why people are making the judgments. The CBI protects incumbent interests, and therefore it always goes for things that are not for the consumer interest but the producer interest.
Yes, okay.
The Governor of the Bank of England is a deeply politicised figure who has been anti-Brexit from the moment it was proposed. What can I see? I can see the opportunities of cheaper food, clothing and footwear, helping most of all the incomes of the least well-off in our society.
Absolutely nobody agrees with you.
Because we can cut tariffs, we can reduce costs to people.
Absolutely nobody agrees with you. Even the Sun newspaper withdrew these claims.
Exciting.
And he gets a knighthood. Wrong about absolutely everything. Unless, of course, you have found that your food is cheaper, your clothing is cheaper, your footwear, cheap shoes. Remember, cheap shoes for peasant. I didn't. You know how these shows work. I never know what direction I'm going to go, and we never know what clips we can dig out or what we can find. But it wouldn't be complete, I don't think, without a little bit of Daniel Hannan, would it?
Outside the EU, our food bills will be lower, our fuel bills will be cheaper, our taxes will be lower. I think people will be better off in terms of their household budgets.
And then thinking back to that Jacob Rees-Mogg thing, I'd go and dig it out on YouTube, and the comments will contain people claiming that he got the better of me. And that's, I'm not being self-referential. Well, I suppose I am, but for a good reason, because that's part of how it happened. People just hear that exchange and they think, well, the posh bloke must be right. Sovereignty, cheap food, shoes, peasants. And listen, literally, even now, looking at the facts, there'll be people going, yeah, so that he showed O'Brien, didn't it? And that is, I don't know what that is. It's psychological, isn't it? It's not political. Is it emotional? I don't know. So that's why I say, if you fell for it, I've got no beef with you, whether it's hormone injected or not. I've got no beef with you. But my God, I've got a beef with them. It's 10:31 and Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. I don't know. I mean, I'm enjoying this. Is that odd? Is that strange? I'd rather have been wrong. But I'm enjoying the scale of the proof that we were right. Listening to people like Rees-Mogg talk undiluted twaddle, now that we know for sure that it's undiluted twaddle. So it wasn't just a case of people who understand things better than he does, people who are more honest than he is, people who are cleverer than he is, pointing out why he was wrong. Now you've got the evidence. And yet Farage is still there saying you just need to believe more. It's going to come back round again, isn't it? Oh, my days. Will the next general election be fought along the lines of just believing more in Brexit? It's not impossible when you look at the front page of today's Daily Express. Anyway, I should probably take my first call. Is this a record, Keith? 10:35? It's not. It's not even close, is it? What's the record? About 10:50? Get without taking a single call? Anyway, Simon in St. Neots gets the nod. Simon, what would you like to say?
Well, I am not enjoying this, to be honest with you. I'm going to bare my soul to you. I'm enormously embarrassed.
Okay.
More than embarrassed. I'm not probably ashamed, but I'm very embarrassed.
Yeah.
Because I voted for Brexit. Okay, I've said it. I voted for Brexit, okay.
Yes.
And I have tried to analyse, not using therapy,
sure.
Which we're both a big fan of, but through self-analysis to work out why.
Yes.
And I think I've arrived with the answer for me, at any rate.
Yes.
And this was it. I pride myself, rightly or wrongly, I pride myself on having an open mind and looking at both sides, or even licking both sides of the argument.
Yes.
And we know what pride comes before. And what happened when I looked back was this. I wanted to look at both sides of the argument, pro and anti-Brexit. And I gave them both credibility, a sort of 50-50 thing.
Yeah.
Instead of, now I discover, well, when I say now I discover, I probably was told but didn't want to hear it, which is another part.
I can carry on because I find this fascinating. I think I know where you're going.
Okay. So I thought, well, so the way, from my recollection, and I could be wrong, it was presented on media and social media and all the rest of it, was this is a 50-50 call, guys. Yeah. And when in actual fact, now I discover, well, probably I'm being disingenuous there, it probably was out there, but I didn't see it because I didn't want to see it, but 80% of over 80% of economists who are the experts, I know people don't like to use that word nowadays for whatever reason, said, no, sorry, this is a bad thing. This is a bad thing. And that was sprinkled with feelings of patriotism and sovereignty, and we can go out into the world now free of the shackles of the EU. And that's why I think as the campaign went on, I became more and more convinced it was the right thing to do.
You got caught up. You got caught up in it, and an awful lot of effort was being put into prioritising feelings over facts, and pretending it was somehow patriotism that they were selling. Some of them believed that they were, but I think that's why you use the word embarrassed instead of ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's worse than you describe. It was more than 80%. Emily Maitlis calls it, and I wish I'd come up with this. In fact, I might pretend I did. James O'Brien calls it the Minford paradigm. And this meant, when she was presenting Newsnight, and later when I had a few goes at it as well, you'd be sitting in a production meeting at the BBC, which is the one place that should have been absolutely objective as opposed to impartial. They're not quite the same thing. Impartial is a form of false equivalence. But you'd be sitting at the BBC, and every single time you talked about it, you had to get an equal and opposite force on. So if it was an economist, it reached the point where there was really only one, a chap called Patrick Minford. So that's why she calls it the Minford paradigm. So you never said to the viewers, by the way, this is the only economist we can find to make this argument. And in the other chair, any one of 2,000 professors could be sitting. And that is why it's not your fault. I think, and it's odd to put the BBC near the top of the list, but they let the country down on an extraordinary scale.
Okay. Yeah, well, there we are. I've bared my soul. I also didn't realise. I mean, I listen to your show a lot, and I know it's only anecdotal. I appreciate it's only anecdotal, but the sheer volume of stories you get from small, medium, and big companies saying, "Blimmin' heck," or words even stronger than that, "Blimmin' heck," the paperwork that's involved, and that's again why I feel embarrassed, because I can remember saying to people, "Oh, it'll be all right." In fact, you probably won't remember, but I think the day after the Brexit result, I actually rang you and said everything's going to be groovy, and I thought, what are people making all the fuss for? This is great.
I wonder if we could try and find that call. Would that be too much penance for you, Simon, do you think?
No, I would consider that an honour.
I mean, if I was your father confessor, that would be the equivalent of 10 Hail Marys, I think. but it's interesting you mentioned therapy, because I do believe that the ability to recognise mistakes and change your mind is massively advanced by self-knowledge, by doing the work, as they say. But I'm glad you said embarrassed and not ashamed, and I'm glad you reminded us of the effort put into persuading you into the position that you adopted. And that is why today I don't think there's any room for condescension or any room for sneering. It may be that some people deserve a little bit, Idiot's Corner is open, but people are honestly prepared and ready to say, I think I fell for it because. And it is almost too good, for want of a better word, to be true, that Farage is today insisting that we need people in charge to deliver the Brexit we voted for, when everybody honest acknowledges that the Brexit they voted for never existed at all. But he's trying to, it's like a manky old empty balloon, and Farage is desperately trying to refill it with his faggy breath. 10:41 is the time. Ravi is in Canary Wharf. Ravi, what would you like to say?
Firstly, thank you for having me on. I'm embarrassed to accept that I should sit for at least some time in that idiot's corner.
Well, not necessarily.
And here's why, James. In March 2016, the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, at that time said the damage caused by losing some of the 100,000 skilled EU workers who work in our health and social care system will have a disastrous impact on the NHS.
He did.
Amber Rudd said, compare leaving EU to a nuclear disaster. And in response to that, some of the Leave folks said, the Brexit will release funds to improve the NHS, and the government was just scaremongering. And there was general feeling that the government was not doing an amazing job. So what they supported, there was just less credibility for a low information, typically low propensity individual, mostly single issue people like myself. And I did not invest a lot of time. I did not seek to understand the nuance. And I was swayed by these simple marketing messages. And I just did not accept the doom and gloom messages.
What was your single issue? Obviously linked to the NHS, but what precisely was it?
So I was concerned about the care that autistic kids or individuals would get. And I was worried that it didn't have investment. And when they spoke about the NHS will get investment, I was hopeful that this would change. Again, as I said, low information.
Well, not really. Again, I'm not in the business of handing people hair shirts or insisting on public flagellation, because that bloody great bus told you that there would be loads more money to look after autistic children. That was the Dominic Cummings quotes, masterstroke end quotes, the 350 million, contingent upon the idea that we would make money from leaving as an economy, as a country.
Right.
And there, perhaps, low information is a valid criticism, because you didn't need to do much research to find out how wrong and ridiculous that was.
And I was hopeful.
Well, exactly.
I was so hopeful, and I didn't accept the trouble was the other messages, the words they were using was nuclear. And, I just didn't think it would be. It's just so bad. Nuclear is so extreme, right? And I was so hopeful that I didn't expect that to happen. So I thought they lost credibility. And this was so easy to read. I didn't spend enough. We had issues at that time anyway. And I didn't see, you could argue that perhaps I should have checked, but now I have changed, right? I'm seeking more information, and I take my civic duty very seriously. I try not to get distracted by shiny objects. I try to understand how it will impact me. I'm not very good at influencing others or anything, but I will sleep better knowing that I'm a little bit more informed than the 2016 version of me.
God, well, I don't know what to say, really, because if I say, well done, it sounds patronising, and I don't want to patronise you. But that simple truth, in fact, both of those calls, Simon and Ravi, just actually stressing the importance of understanding things better, which is why I've got such a problem with so many members of the media, because it's my job to give you what you need to understand stuff better. I think it's my job. Some people who do this for a living have clearly very, very different ideas of what their job is, give you something to hate every morning. But that, I think, is what the media is supposed to be. So I grew up at my father's knee believing that that's what journalism is supposed to do. And yet a quick survey of both broadcast and print media, and you find them almost all queuing up to sell this pup to the nation and now wash their hands of all responsibility. The time is 10:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:49 is the time. Just skimming through this Daily Express article telling you that you need to believe more in Brexit 5 years to the day after they were queuing up to tell you it was brilliant. I wonder if we can remind ourselves what Farage said at the time, because he must have read the deal. He must have known exactly what was going to happen. He's such a details man. But he has, the Express do ask him to list some of the successes, and I think I need to eat some humble pie here, because he said that the UK now is standing taller in the world than it was before. So I think that's, come on. That's you can't dispute that. That's a win. The UK is, quotes, standing taller, end quotes, in the world. And so those are, a lot of people claim it's very hard to identify successes or benefits. But goodness me, standing taller in the world, that's fantastic. You can butter your bread tonight with that, can't you? You can pay your mortgage with standing taller in the world. Who needs free movement when you're standing taller? You can't move as much, but you're standing taller. So you're a bit sort of immobile, but tall. What an absolute clown that man is. It would be so funny if it wasn't so dangerous, because people are still falling for it. And the AUKUS nuclear submarine tie-up with Australia and the US. That's the big win, apparently, which I'm sure you were all toasting at Christmas this year. Where would we be without the AUKUS submarine tie-up with Australia and the US? 10:50 is the time. A lot of requests for greatest hits. I don't know what the greatest hit of all is. My favourite is actually the Rees-Mogg interview, because the Rees-Mogg interview is like the curtain pulled back moment. And yet at the time of the interview, people could still pretend, no, that's not fair. People could still believe what he was telling them, even as, little boys like me in the crowd were shouting, the Emperor's naked, the Emperor's naked. Somehow people could still believe that the Emperor wasn't naked. I've just conjured up the image of a naked Jacob Rees-Mogg, haven't I? I am so sorry. I might refer myself to Ofcom. That's just disgusting. I'm so sorry. I swear on my life I will never do that again, okay? But that was the point. You could say black is white, up is down, freedom is slavery. You could say that. He could say when we did that interview. He could say, no, that's just not true. You're trying to avoid the adverts or . And now he can't. Now it's all there, except he got a knighthood. For what? Services to lies. Andrea Leadsom got a damehood. For what? Services to lies. It's incredible when you think about it. Daniel Hannan sits in the House of Lords. Wait, is it services to lies or services to stupidity? It's always hard to tell. Gisela Stewart, House of Lords. Wrong about everything. In terms, it's on tape. They said things that they thought were true or they wanted you to believe, and they were wrong. Wrong. Knighthood, damehood, House of Lords, TV shows, newspaper columns, Dorries, one of the worst offenders. Lucrative newspaper column. Did she get any sort of title? I know she spat her dummy out over not getting into the House of Lords, but did she get anything? Is she like a dame or something? Dame Dorries. Coming soon to a pantomime near you. So this is close. I don't know whether this is my favourite. It's quite long, this, and I tell you what I like. I like the idea of someone turning on the radio in about a minute's time and thinking that they've accidentally fallen into a space-time vortex and woken up in 2017. What year was this? Do we know? 2016? No, I can't remember. But I remember the call.
I actually think in order to negotiate the issue...
Who's that shouting in the background?
It's my mum.
Okay.
Do apologise.
That's all right. It kind of goes with the territory for people who call themselves Brexiteers, doesn't it?
Yes. So basically, in order to negotiate with those people who want a second referendum, why don't we make it more democratic by introducing a PR election at the same time?
Right. Yes. So we
two.
change our entire electoral system by the end of March.
Well, it's not going to happen, but it's.
What do you think you won, Robert?
What I would like is...
What do you think you won?
What I want is basically our whole governance, or the way that the wealth controls our country.
No. So what do you think? What do you think you won?
Well, I'm just about to explain that. I want...
no, not want. Won. W-O-N. What do you think you won?
I won. A slap in the government's face to show them that they...
that government's gone. So what did you win?
Well, that government is a reform of the continuous politicians that are put forward instead of actually giving people and...
Let's have one more go. Take a little pause and tell me what you think you won.
What I won?
Yeah.
I won a vote to leave the EU.
No, I know that bit, but what did you win? What was the prize?
To actually undress our politicians, if that's a better way to actually put it, because
it's even worse, incredibly. You almost deserve credit for that. So what you won to undress our politicians. And who's going to be in charge of Brexit?
Well, the way that they're dealing with Brexit is not something I agree with, because, quite frankly, I would be negotiating.
But now we're back to silly rhetoric, aren't we? And ludicrous claims.
Well, no,
in terms of measurable, tangible benefits, what did you win?
What did I win? I won a deregulated country.
What does that mean?
Can deregulate itself. Well, it means that we can strip away from the EU laws that we don't like.
For example?
And well, for me, one of the ones is the plug system.
Pardon?
I know it's not very hugely, but we obviously use free pin plugs in this country.
Yes.
The EU don't. And so basically it means that our safety aspects are a lot stronger than the generalisation of the EU.
But we're in the EU.
Rather than going... Pardon?
We're in the EU. So you think we have to leave the EU to get 3-pin plugs?
No, it's about going back to some of the things where we are stronger at.
Yeah, go on. Talk me through the plugs thing. So what can we do now with plugs that we can't do as members?
Well, we can still do it, but the manufacturers that we ship into
what
this
did you win then?
Compliancy to British law.
Compliancy to British law?
Yes.
Right.
So when you bring something into this country, it has to comply to the UK.
That's what happens already. That's why we've got 3-pin plugs, you see, and they haven't.
No, because they use plastic rather than metal.
The EU sets the base level above which we are all free to go, as the fact that we have gone proves. Mate, just pause for a minute and think about what you've just done.
You've come live on national radio.
Yeah.
You've described yourself as a Brexiteer. You're getting told off by your mum in the background. And when I've asked you what you think you've won, you've said the right to have 3-pin plugs that we already have.
It's also...
And it's 10:30 on Monday morning, mate. Simon Conway has the headlines.
It's not 10:30 on Monday morning. It's 10:56 on Friday morning. 4 years later, 3 years later, you can sort of tell by how many furrows there are in my brow when these clips are recorded. I think I look less furrowed now than I did in the middle of that era. It's hardly surprising, isn't it? I almost had a handprint on my face at one point because I was palming my face so often. 10:57 is the time. I think it would be wrong not to continue with this. Can we do request? Do we do requests, Eleanor? Can we do requests, or is that going to be too much? Okay, we'll do some requests. I got a lovely message this morning suggesting that we were going to do 3 hours of I Told You So, which is obviously a ridiculous suggestion, but I love the way you phrased it. You said, "We love all your new material, James, but sometimes the punters just want to hear the hits." And there is a serious question underpinning all of this, well, there's two. The first is, how did it happen? And the second is, what bit of it did you fall for? I don't think Peter in Gillingham fell for any of it, but he always has interesting things to say on this subject. What are they going to be today, Peter?
It's the Brexitist, Peter from Gillingham, James. Therapy is your word. You said it earlier. I named a book on Brexitism after our last conversation, so that's great. And I speak to people who are like Colin from Portsmouth all the time.
Yes.
So I have a certain level of endurance like you do. To answer your earlier question, the 11% composition, based on talking to loads of people, is really made up now of the unelected superstate people who think that the EU is ruling us with their 3-pin plugs.
So we're better off out of it, even though I can't give you any real reasons why we're better off out of it. It's a really big success just because reasons.
No, but the 3-pin plugs, you just said it. And so it's the unelected superstate and a few racists. Because Cameron has gone, the bus has gone, taking back control has gone, the training shoes have gone, and everything else has gone.
You don't feel that the country is standing taller in the world, Peter, as Nigel tells us?
Well, we can impose our 3-pin plugs on the world, can't we?
On everybody. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and it's perfectly reasonable to take the mickey, but there must be some substantive things that people say to you. Well, who is Farage appealing to now when he says you just need to believe more?
Oh, Farage is brilliantly clever, isn't he? He's realised.
In some ways,
he's got that demographic of the closet racist vote. So he's now talking about farming. He's now talking about other demographics because he knows he can't get any more of those, or that they'll leave him. So you
has to keep selling it, not take any responsibility for it, but keep flogging it.
Yeah, new demographics is what Farage is up to.
Yeah.
But I was cheered on Tuesday. I went to see John Curtis, and he said the time is now to campaign to rejoin, which is lucky because the Brexitism book is out. And Stella Creasy yesterday...
How dare you plug books on this programme that weren't written by me? That's outrageous behaviour.
Damn me.
Was that at the Britain in Europe meeting on Tuesday? Was that
UK?
Change in Europe. And then
I went to Stella Creasy last night, and she was disarmingly honest, but she got annoyed with me because I said that Labour needed more Co-Jones or courage, and she said, we're very courageous.
Well, I don't think anyone's going to agree with that. And you're right to remind us that the spotlight now moves around a bit. It's hard to know which bit to focus on. But on the day of the 5th anniversary, I think the rearview mirror is a perfectly reasonable place to be concentrating our attention. Peter, thank you. If you want to tell me what you fell for, and I thought that Simon and Ravi set the tone quite perfectly, actually. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. But I think Peter opens the gate to people who didn't fall for it. And it's time for us now to reflect on, who you feel the most, I don't want to say bitterness, because we're having quite a nice morning together, regardless of how you voted in 2016. But who you hold most responsible, who or what were the biggest factors? So it's not just going to be individuals. You've got a bus, for example, or a BBC have popped up already. If you step back in an almost academic fashion and try to forensically unpick the road to becoming the first population in history to vote to smash itself in the face with a frying pan or impose economic sanctions on itself, whichever you prefer. What were the key factors? What were the key constituents the key milestones, perhaps, in that journey. It's 11:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is, 5 minutes after 11 is the time. It's interesting how many people are mentioning David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn. I shouldn't be surprised by that. They both get a chapter in my book. If Peter's allowed to plug his, I can mention briefly that How They Broke Britain crashed through the 300,000 sales mark over Christmas, which I discovered earlier this week. That's something for which I will be eternally grateful to you. But Cameron and Corbyn both get a chapter. And it's not just about Brexit. It's about the diminishment of the entire country. Cameron, as Nassim puts it, because of his inability to say no and starting this ball rolling. Hilarious, really, to reflect upon the idea that he put the referendum in the manifesto believing, A, that he would probably not have to deliver it because they weren't going to get back in 2015, and B, that it would somehow see off the threat of Nigel Farage's populist lies. How did that work out for you, Dave? And Jeremy Corbyn, of course, because he was just nowhere to be seen. He was AWOL throughout the entire campaign, and refused, of course, to share podiums with people who were prioritising the national interest over partisanship. But not immediately obvious candidates, but interesting how many of you reached for them immediately. It is 6 minutes after 11. Two questions really on the board today. The first being, why do you think you fell for it? And that is asked from a place of compassion and understanding, not condescension or sneering. There might be a need for a little bit of condescension and sneering if people are still boneheaded and stubborn and unpleasant, but a huge number of lovely people voted for something that they now realise they shouldn't have done, and I want to know why you think you did. That's all. There's no other subtext or agenda whatsoever. That's all, just understanding it better, because Farage is going to try again. He's going to try again to claim that, there is a brilliant Brexit, goes to a different school. And there aren't that many places in the media that seem capable of pulling his pants down. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. A quick clip, another greatest hit from the past. They don't all have to be from my show, by the way. Another one who's fled. Did he get a knighthood, Rob? He ended up deputy leader, didn't he, of the whole country? Deputy Prime Minister. Deputy Prime Minister. Do you remember this moment?
We want a bespoke arrangement on goods which recognises the peculiar, frankly, geographic economic entity that is the United Kingdom. We are, and I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this, but if you look at the UK and you look at how we trade in goods, we're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing.
Do you know what job he'd just been appointed to when he realised that the Dover-Calais crossing was quite important to trade? You won't believe me. If you don't know already, and I tell you, you'll think I'm yanking your chain. He'd just been made Secretary of State for Brexit. I had no idea. Dover, you say? Dover. I thought that was a car that they made at Longbridge in Dover. Oh, and Calais? Dover to Calais? What, over the sea in a boat? Or a tunnel, perhaps. There's a tunnel? What's your job, Dom? Secretary of State for Brexit. I'll never forget him. I think he was on Ian Dale's show, saying people like James O'Brien will call you racist if you think it's a good idea, which I never did. I just call people like you stupid, because if you truly only discovered the importance of the Dover-Calais crossing after becoming Secretary of State for Brexit and persuading or helping to persuade an entire country to vote for the thing that you're now charged with delivering but can't, then you are either deeply, deeply dishonest or horribly, horribly stupid. So I will save the condescension and the insults for the ringleaders, not for the misled. And I'm not going to change on that. I know some people get cross with me sometimes. They say, it's time to have some contempt for the conned. It's not. It never will be. John's in Chester. John, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I'm a potato farmer in Cheshire, James,
yes.
And I'm politically lost. And my industry is on its knees due to the Conservative and previous governments lying to us. And Brexit was the biggest one of all. So we were...
What did they tell you? Because I remember... And the NFU has been slightly misrepresented, or farmers have been slightly misrepresented. I think there was a slightly higher percentage among farmers than there was among the general population. But the idea that every farmer voted for it is both inaccurate and unfair. But what were the things you thought? Remind me what you were told you were going to get.
There's a bit of background to that.
Yes,
so we've had years of everything that was hard for us was blamed on regulation from Europe.
Yes.
And I'm talking decades. So if you drip feed that into someone's head, you start to believe it.
Yeah, of course you do.
And then we were sold the dream that we were going to have an open world to trade with. Well, that works the other way. We can sell our industry and fetch it from wherever because restrictions are less in other parts of the world, so it makes cheaper food.
Yeah, of course.
So your traceability completely doesn't matter. Supermarkets don't care about that as long as it's about the price. So it's not just been the last few governments, it's gone back decades, and we have been told all our problems were blamed on Europe. So you're losing this, you're doing that, extra loopholes because of Europe. So when it came to the vote, we thought, well, we'll get rid of all that and we'll be free to do what we want to do best, and that's produce food for the world. But it doesn't work like that.
No, when did the penny drop?
The Theresa May period, when you realise that the red line was the biggest problem, because that's not healthy. You can't go into a negotiation and put red lines in and say, well, we're not doing that. It's not a negotiation.
Yes.
So I had meetings with economists, and you were talking to them before, and they said, well, if we do come out of Europe, we're going to get different trade deals, we'll be free to trade it. But it doesn't work like that. It just means we're an open door. We're open then to other conversations from bigger countries. Liz Truss sold us down the river with her agreements with New Zealand and
Australia.
And Australia. And it's just a big lie. And I believe right now I'm lost politically because sold down the river by the Conservatives.
Yes.
I'm not a Labour. I don't lean that way.
Fair enough.
And I think we're an industry like that, to be fair.
The Lib Dems are generally quite friendly with farmers.
Yeah.
That sounded a bit wrong, didn't it?
Well, it did sound a bit wrong, but wasn't Nick Clegg matey with David Cameron at one stage?
Yeah, but it's a very different party under Ed Davey.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where we're going to go. And I believe Brexit is... So I'm in a family farm. My father voted to stay in.
Right.
I voted to come out.
Gosh.
The heated discussions after that has been, he's like, told you this would happen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but I only listen to information. So you can't blame me for listening.
I'm glad you said that, because I don't, and you know that I don't, and I don't think your dad should either, although family's family, so I don't want to get involved in any of that.
Yeah.
But you've got quite a few people today pointing out that all you did was trust people whose professional reputation, whether they're in politics or the media or somewhere in between, whose professional reputation should have been trustworthy.
Yeah, I mean, the slogan on a bus, 350 million a week, was the biggest lie there's ever been, and it's just been allowed to go. It had been let go. Now, if I represented somebody and lied, I'd be held accountable for that.
Same, actually. Well, no, I probably wouldn't, because there's plenty of people in this line of the work who were part of the lies, and they're still doing the job. So, as a potato farmer, what have the negative impacts been? How has life got worse?
We used to import a lot of the seed potatoes from Holland because it's the best seed we can get.
Yes.
That market's gone because of restrictions coming this way.
Yeah.
So our Scottish seed growers are exporting theirs to Europe now and making us pay more if you want them.
So the supply has been reduced and demand has stayed the same, and supply has been diminished.
Yeah, and we used to export potatoes to Ireland and Belgium. It's harder because of the paperwork, but they're supplying here easier.
I presume you're enormously comforted when Nigel Farage tells you that the country is standing taller in the world, John.
Well, I don't really want to get into a debate on whether I believe in reform, because that's not why I've rung in today. Because I just think the whole system wants a shake-up.
Yeah,
I don't know whether Nigel's
that's why
the right
people
man.
voted for Brexit, to give the system a shake-up.
Yeah, well, it shook us up the wrong way, didn't it?
Well, be careful what you wish for, John.
Yeah.
Thank you, mate, and thank you as well for trying to sustain my policy this morning of having conversations that will involve remembered disagreements, continuing disagreements. But I will take away from that the idea of someone whose livelihood has been diminished by Brexit, thinking that Nigel Farage still might be trustworthy, because you are part of a crucial constituency of people. But I respect your desire not to get into that today. We'll wait until the election looms a little bit closer. But remember what he's telling you, John. You just need to believe more. If you try believing, for example, that seed potato supply could be different just by the power of thought, then you'd be on board with Nigel's latest grift. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 11. It's not just requests from my show. There are other moments in the media where the truth managed to just peek through the layers and layers and layers of lies, misinformation, propaganda, racism. You remember the Breaking Point poster that Farage unveiled shortly before Joe Cox was assassinated by a far-right terrorist. The other media did, or the BBC, pretending that it was impartial to have a 50-50 argument between someone who was demonstrably wrong and someone who was demonstrably right, culminating, I alluded to it earlier, a couple of you weren't familiar with the example, culminating for me in a television studio when I had the opportunity to interview the former Director General of the World Trade Organization, and one of the producers on the programme said to me, of course we'll have to get someone from the other side. And I said, what is the other side? Pascal Lamy used to run the World Trade Organization, and we're having a conversation about people like Jacob Rees-Mogg claiming that they know what would happen if we were to trade under WTO rules. So we'll ask the man that used to run the WTO what that would mean. What does the other side look like? There is no other side. I try to think of a simile, an analogy. What else would it be like? Here's the man that runs something telling you what it does. Oh, yes, but we need someone from the other side. So I said, who have you got to go up against the former Director General of the World Trade Organization? And do you know who it was? Literally, so I'm sitting in the Newsnight studio saying, who on earth are you going to get to argue with the former Director General of the World Trade Organization about what the World Trade Organization actually is and actually does? And do you know who it was? I can hear some of you shouting at the radio. I'll give you a clue.
Let me get this right. You're claiming that we could leave the EU, which will mean, because you've made a big song and dance about it, ending free movement of peoples.
It wasn't Andrew Neil.
Not apply to the United Kingdom, but we would still access the single market on the same basis as we do now.
We would continue to trade tariff-free because it's in their interest even more than ours. And just to be clear...
So, let me try and get you to be clear, because it's interesting.
So there it is. Andrew Neil there in his pre-GBB's meltdown, and Andrea Leadsom before she was made a dame for services to British politics, the latter demonstrating abject ignorance of almost everything. And yet, the BBC decided that they needed to put someone like her up against someone like Pascal Lamy. Incredible. But here is another example from elsewhere in the media, because we can't take all the credit on this programme, of what happened when you actually dug a little bit deeper. This is Channel 4 news from back in the day.
It's all about immigration. Right? It's not about trade or Europe or anything like that. It's all about immigration. It's to stop the Muslims from coming into this country. Simple as that.
Do you think you voted to leave the EU to stop Muslims coming to the country?
To stop immigration.
Right.
But the movement of people in Europe, fair enough. But not from Africa, Syria, Iraq, everywhere else. It's all wrong.
How's that working out for you? It reminded me of Steve in Harrow, which was one of the calls that walks that tightrope between being hilarious and quite chilling, because these are Nigel Farage's people, and arguably there are now more of them than there were before he sold Brexit to the country.
I live in Harrow.
Yeah.
When I go down to Harrow, and this is not being racist, James, because that term is so easily used and very loosely used. When I go down to Harrow, and I've lived here for 30 years, I walk into Harrow Shopper Centre, and I swear to God, I don't know where I am. I've got Polish, Romanians, Bulgarians sitting outside coffee houses doing sod all day. I've got every nationality under the sun, and it's lost its identity. When I go into Norfolk Park Hospital, and I went in there 3 Sundays ago because I had to go in an emergency, I walked into the accident and emergency, as I said to your researcher, 120 people in there. I was lucky if I saw 3 or 4 white faces. It's okay if you live...
Now that is racist.
No,
that last bit is.
It's realistic.
No, it isn't, because you're forming an opinion of people or their value based on their colour. There are people who don't have white faces who are just as British as you and me, Steve.
Perhaps there are, James, but if...
Well, no, they all are.
You go down
and that's... name me the European Union... Steve, mate, let's not do this. Let's do it nicely. Just tell me the European Union country that is populated by non-white people.
Couldn't tell you.
Well, have a go. Have a little think.
Say the question again?
The European Union countries, because we're talking about your reasons for leaving the European Union, and then you mentioned the fact that there weren't any white people in Northwick Pass Hospital. So which European Union countries are essentially non-white?
Probably none.
So why are you talking about those people then?
All right. Let's backtrack.
Yeah, let's, mate. I'm happy to let you do that.
No, let's backtrack. But it is still a valid point, James.
Not in the context of a conversation about the European Union, Steve.
Yeah,
and I'm afraid that if you are judging people according to their skin colour, then you are, and I say this with love and reluctance, then you are indulging in racial prejudice.
But James is.
So I don't care what colour you are.
Yeah,
I don't say. I'm never going to say to Beth at the end of the programme, we had too many black people on today, or we had too many white people on today.
But it's not all about. It's not all about white people, white English people. We're going off tangent.
Well, no, you did, mate. I'm just reining you back in again. So crack on.
It's not all about the racist issue. It's just about the fact that the country has lost its identity.
What does that mean?
And that. Well, what does it mean? It means that what I've just said, that...
You've just said that you don't like seeing brown faces at the hospital.
Okay, no. Is it right then, James? Let's give another example, right? I might be digging myself a big hole, but...
I'll pull you out, mate, I promise.
Right. But the point I'm trying to make, if you went down to my local, and I'll give you an absolute point here, if you went down to my local supermarket, I won't name which one it is, okay?
Yeah.
And one of my sons tried to get a job down, or two of my sons tried to get a job down there in a few years when they were in between university and going from college to university. At one point, James, there was 23 tills open, and 22 of them, okay,
yes, mate,
had Indians or Pakistani people.
But we're talking about the European Union, Steve.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say, James, is this is where it's all coming from. And when I mentioned this to the manager, okay, the manager said to me, we have to reflect the local community. And the point I'm trying to make, James, and you're trying to, to a degree, defend me, but to attack me, is that right, James?
Mate,
that is why people have voted out of Europe.
Because we've got too many brown people on the tills in Harrow.
It's not about having too many. But when I was
what is it then, Steve? Just mate, slow down a little bit. Because if you're not complaining about there being too many brown people, why do you keep talking about the number of brown people in the hospital and the number of brown people in the supermarket?
The reason I'm saying that is, James, is because that is why people voted to leave Europe, because of Great Britain.
I don't disagree with you. No, it's not because of Great Britain losing its identity. It's because people are frightened of brown people.
No, it's not about it. No, James.
What difference does it make to me? Just help me out here, because I can kind of get my... just because I work on the phones every day, so I have no idea what colour anybody is. Steve, stop talking. Stop talking just for a moment, my friend, all right? Why does it matter to you what colour the person that you buy your milk off is?
Well, it doesn't matter the colour that the person I buy my milk off, James. But what the point I'm trying to make is why people voted out of Europe.
I'm not arguing with you. They voted out of Europe because they think there's too many brown people in their hometowns.
Is it unfair then, James, to say that when I mentioned what I said about the local supermarket, that
and the hospital,
when I'm told, and the hospital, but let's go to the supermarket. When I'm told that we have to reflect the local community, is that not racist, James?
No, Steve. Bless him. 25 minutes after 11 is the time, and I don't know whether it is heartbreaking or hilarious or somewhere in between the two, but of course the more you dug, the more you scratched, the more you came across stuff like that. Let's go to Gareth, who's in Cubbin in Northern Ireland. Gareth, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'm a wee bit like, the chap from Talk TV, Peter Cardwell, except I'm the opposite. He's from Northern Ireland as well, but he says he should have voted to leave rather than to vote remain. I'm the opposite. I voted to leave, even though I should have voted to remain.
Why do you think? What do you think? Which bits of the project do you think you fell for?
Well, I did it out of kindness because I honestly thought that what Daniel Hannan said would have happened. They would have come to some kind of an average with Theresa May, and therefore Northern Ireland would not have actually been affected by it. But they kept on going and going and going, and I thought I had an insurance policy. I was going to try and heal Great Britain
What,
Because
personally, single-handed? I don't know who you were referring to at the beginning of the call, but I'm interested in your thinking. How are you personally going to heal Great Britain?
Because this has been a sore on Great Britain since Thatcher, since the downfall of Thatcher, for my entire life since I finished my compulsory education in 1990. They needed to lance this boil. They needed to remove this sore. And therefore, I actually wanted there to be some kind of a compromise like what Daniel Hannan was talking about. It wouldn't have actually affected Northern Ireland either, whereas they kept on going.
So when Daniel
Hannan
Hannan said absolutely nobody is talking about leaving the single market, that disappeared incredibly quickly from the conversation. In fact, the previous caller pointing out it disappeared with Theresa May's red lines. But that you highlight the point that there are 100 different Brexits that people voted for, none of which were deliverable, but all of which were sellable.
And also the customs union, because the difference between biological safety or whatever and customs is that customs is more to do with sovereignty, because it is quite literally His Majesty's revenue and customs. And therefore you can see why people from a unionist background in Northern Ireland have a problem with that. It doesn't affect my day-to-day life whatsoever.
No, well,
they went too far.
Well, it's feelings, isn't it? It's the feeling of being British that gets diluted by closer and closer ties with the south of Ireland. And you're right. I can understand where the unionists are coming from on that, but it is, I'm afraid, frying pan in the face territory once again. It's coming up to 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Who do you think wrote this? Who do you think wrote this in today's Daily Telegraph? Brexit wasn't a failure. It liberated us from the declining dictatorial EU. And if you want to sort of undertake a masterclass in dishonesty, if you've got to write an article for the Daily Telegraph about how Brexit wasn't a failure, and you know that the opinion polling has got not just 1 in 10 people considering it to be a failure, but 1 in 5, no, I must get this right, 1 in 20 Leave voters thinking it's gone well, then you have to write this. You actually have to write plenty. Let me get this absolutely right. Here you go. Expect this anniversary week to be confronted by sheaths of opinion poll paper, thick as autumnal leaves in Vallombrosa, telling us that we regret our decision and are just desperate to send our bureaucrats. So you have to write in your article, don't listen to the people. Don't listen to all the people telling you that they think it's been a failure. Listen to me. Who do you think wrote that? Who do you think has the absolute brass neck, the unimaginable audacity to tell you not to listen to the people that are calling me, but instead to follow Farage's lead and just believe more, or to believe that it's actually gone really, really well, that it wasn't a failure at all? So don't listen to all of the people queuing up to say I made a terrible mistake. Listen to this character. I'll leave that one open for the court. It's not Daniel Hannan. That's the only clue I'm going to give you. OK? Here's Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:33, and this obsession I've got, or this inability I've got not to try to knit together things that don't necessarily knit together, but I think they usually do. Beginning of this week, of course, I played you my interview with Lawrence Rees, the historian of Nazism, who has written an incredible new book, The Nazi Mind, 12 Warnings from History. And inevitably, as he spoke, we heard some deep echoes from the very modern political landscape, largely on the other side of the Atlantic. But that idea of there's too many brown people here, and therefore I'll vote for them, that's obviously not disappeared with Brexit. Arguably, it's got even worse. Trump took it to a new level yesterday when he moved the spotlight onto disabled people and tried to blame them for the plane crash in Washington, D.C. And he also displayed almost psychopathic contempt for the victims of that tragedy when he was asked whether or not he would be visiting the site of the crash, visiting the river, the Potomac River in Washington, where the aeroplane came down. The answer to the question, which nobody got, actually, to be fair, it's because nobody reads the Telegraph, so you're not aware that David Frost, Lord, good God, is there anyone who didn't get... So he's the fellow that negotiated the agreement, isn't he? He's the fellow that negotiated the agreement and then tried to sort of backtrack on it or claim that it before the ink was even dry on Boris Johnson's signature. So he's in the House of Lords. David Frost, writing a column for the Daily Telegraph under the headline, Brexit wasn't a failure. It liberated us from the declining dictatorial EU. And he urges his readers to ignore what people are actually saying about it and to focus instead on, I don't know, what he is saying about it. Absolutely breathtaking. 11:35 is the time. Sorry, Brian, you did guess it correctly. Somewhat embarrassingly, by far the most requested clip from back in the day, as we trawl the Brexit archives, by far the most requested clip from this radio station didn't happen on my programme. Like, you absolute monsters. I can't believe it. I come here every day. I did that. But I am going to play it. Not yet. But I am aware of what really has gone down in history as possibly the finest call ever to LBC. And it is indeed Brexit related, and it didn't come to me, which is obviously a source of some upset. And then I'm going to let you decide. So looking at all the... Yeah, you're right, Matthew Elliott, House of Lords. All of them. It's absolutely extraordinary. So 1 in 10 people now think it's gone well. All of the people that sold it have been promoted. Some of the politicians are gone, but even they walked away with titles. Why on earth did Boris Johnson make Andrea Jenkins a dame? Anyone? Anyone? No? Me neither. So, fish and chips woman. So we've had 3-pin plug man. Quite a few people requesting fish and chips woman. But it's 13 minutes long. I'm going to let you decide whether or not you want to hear the whole thing or whether or not we will politely ask Eleanor to edit it a bit. So what would we put? So you text edit or yes. Does that work? So just text edit or yes. So WhatsApp it to 0345 6060 everyone's guessed correctly which clip it is that is most requested but didn't happen on this programme. I will play that later. I'll build up a little bit of tension, especially for people who haven't heard it before. It is absolutely golden. But do you want to hear the whole thing? All 13 minutes of fish and chips woman? Or do you want Eleanor to edit it? All right, so text yes or edit to all the usual numbers. David Davis hasn't really popped up yet. Or Digby Pudding Jones. Do you remember Digby Pudding Jones? All of these people, did he? He was already in the House of Lords. I bet David Davis got a knighthood, did he? You don't even need to check. Did he? Well, we do need to check, actually. Well, I mean, what I mean is I'm pretty sure he did, but I can't be 100% sure until I've checked. So, David Davis, let's have a look. It's coming in. Yes. Oh, I like this. Look at that, Keith. That's incredible, isn't it? Who knew that so many people were listening, let alone getting involved? There is smoke now coming out of my switchboard. It's looking like a yes. There's a few edits in there. But all right. So we'll take it up to 45 and then possibly come back after the 45 with the entire fish and chips woman clip, unless the edits mount a late surge and overtake all the yeses. Tony is in Chipping Sodbury. Tony, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Tony.
I voted to leave the European Union and very much regret it.
Yes.
I think it's been disastrous what's happened. But I'd like to explain to you why I actually voted to leave.
Of course.
And that was because I'm 72 now.
Yeah.
And back in the early 70s, we had a referendum to join the common market, which I wholeheartedly voted for because I thought it was a great idea. And I think it was a very successful what we did. As the years went by and the European Union became what it was, I thought it was great that we didn't adopt the euro because I felt that we did want to maintain our independence financially. And when we came to the latest vote to leave the union, I was under the impression that we could do that and remain in the common market.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I was sold. And
Who do you think sold you that?
I don't know.
No, I can't remember either. But
I just think the whole... I'm sure that's my understanding. Whether I was totally misguided or misunderstood what was going on in that respect. And when Theresa May started trying to negotiate, I was horrified to find that they were trying to barter in a way which would, I thought it was impossible to actually achieve a deal where we could remain in the common market but lose the shackles of the laws being made in Brussels, that sort of thing.
Well, let's not resurrect that ghost. I mean, you were not just, respectfully, not just misled in 2016, you were misled in 1973 as well. Because I heard this a lot at the time, that I didn't sign up for this, I signed up for that. Ted Heath, who was Prime Minister, wrote in 1973 that the community which we are joining is far more than a common market. It is a community in the true sense of that term. It is concerned not only with the establishment of free trade, economic and monetary union and other major economic issues, important though these are, but also, as the Paris Summit meeting has demonstrated, with social issues which affect us all. Environmental questions, working conditions in industry, consumer protection, aid to development areas and vocational training. So that is actually what you voted for in 1973, never mind.
Yeah, I was probably slightly misguided there, but having said that, a lot of the things that you've just mentioned were entirely good things anyway. It's just that I don't know where it became overburdened when we felt that we were losing control.
Felt. There's the key word, felt. And of course, the facts never really supported that, which is why the classic calls on this programme, Tony, involved people being asked to name which law it was that they wanted to no longer have to obey, and nobody could ever tell me. I'd get stuff about hairdryers or 3-pin plugs or fish and chips or something like that. So the idea that we could opt out of some of it but stay in the trade side of it, that I don't think you were silly to believe that, because I think lots of people were selling that up until the moment that the result came in, and then they all suddenly went very quiet.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And as you've pointed out on various occasions, it's been a complete disaster.
Well, you make me sound boring, Tony, or repetitive. Yes, and no calls really, and you've got to be able to string a sentence together to come on the programme, but no one's really going to try to argue that it's gone well, because that 10% or whatever, 20% of people that voted for it who don't think it's been a failure would be either, I suppose, part of the Farage believers, just believe a little bit more and it'll be brilliant, or genuinely persuaded themselves that sovereignty is something valuable. Yes, we're out. Or you're like David Frost. Brexit wasn't a failure. It liberated us from the declining dictatorial EU. And I'd say to you again, show me a problem in Germany, a real problem, because no one is pretending that being in the EU makes countries perfect. Otherwise, we'd have been perfect until 2016 or 2019. But show me a problem in Germany, and I'll show you something that would be worse if they weren't in the European Union. Oh, go on then. So, speaking of Farage, here is the finest ever Brexit-related call to LBC, in which I, James O. Brexit, do not feature at all.
Bit sorry for Boris, Mark, or not?
That's where I've been for the last few years. I've got to say, I'm immensely grateful to you for everything you've done in British politics over the last few years. I used to be an ardent Remainer. I voted Remain. I believed in the European project. Mm-hmm. I believed that staying in the European Union was the best thing for us. And then something happened, and something monumental happened. It completely changed my opinion on the whole situation.
What was that monumental thing, Mark?
I was kicked in the head by a horse.
Right, very good. Okay, fine.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is something you can play back if you just want to have a bit of a giggle, regardless of how many times you've heard it. And of course, there was that Eddie Mair interview with Liz Truss when she said that people didn't want to change their minds or shouldn't, and he pointed out that she had, as a Remain campaigner, a radio god, Eddie Mair. I don't know whether Christine in Southampton counts as a radio goddess, but I've had 1,300 votes on whether or not we should play this clip in its entirety. In of course, just a matter of minutes. And the massive majority of them were play it in its entirety. So take it away, Christine. Christine is in Southampton. Christine, what would you like to say?
Right. Good morning, James.
Hello, Christine.
For a start, I'm patriotic. I'm a Brit Exeter. If we've got to get out with no deal, we do.
Why?
And I am... because I'm 70 years old.
Yeah.
I worked for Mullards, which was a Dutch-based firm. And they said, if I don't vote for Europe, I lose my job.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I voted for Europe, not for them to control us. But...
Yes, but you just said we need to leave with no deal. I'm just wondering why.
I lost my job anyway, because it closed down in the end.
Yes.
They went from one company to another. So So I'm sorry.
So why does that mean why does that mean the whole
right.
country has to leave with no deal? I'm very sorry that you lost your job, but why would that make you vote for a policy that will mean lots of other people lose their jobs?
We have had bad times in this country and we've had good times, and I've gone through the lot, and we've come out on top because of character. He's right. We can source stuff from the rest of the world.
What stuff?
Well, I'll give you an example.
Yes, do.
The guy who owns Wetherspoons,
Yes.
when we got the vote that we wanted to come out, he started sourcing from other places in the world for a lot of his goods, and he wrote it in his magazine. That's where I read it from.
Yeah.
And he said he sourced goods. I think it was brandies, all sorts of spirits.
Was it cheaper than what he was getting
it was cheaper,
from the European
and it
Union?
was just as good.
So why wasn't he doing? You realise he was doing that before we left?
Because we were part of Europe.
Yes, but we still are. So why couldn't he have done that?
We've been conned.
Christine, just pause for a little moment, if you would. I'm going to take what you said on trust. I'm sure that he did manage to secure.
Well, bring him on, interview him.
Absolutely, I will. I don't need to. I've got you here to represent him, but he's more than welcome to ring in, just as everybody else is. So. Your evidence that it's a good idea to leave is that he found cheaper drinks before we left.
And he passed it on. Well, they were all preparing if we left Europe.
But Christine, just again, I'm sorry, but you have to just reflect for a moment on what you've just said. We have to leave so that Tim Martin of Wetherspoons can do something he's already done.
Yeah, because he did it to prepare for if we had
he could do it. Christina, I'm going to labour this point, and I do apologise because it's not going to be pretty, but we're still in the European Union.
We are at the moment.
And he did this thing you're telling me we have to leave the European Union to do.
No, what he says is an example of all the Ramonas who keep saying
No, Christine, stop using insulting language.
Okay, I won't use that.
He has done something.
I've been insulted some of Brexit.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that, but here's the thing, Christine. If this is the example you want to, if this is the bridge that you want to build, you've just told me that he's already done it.
Yes, because he's preparing for it.
Yes, but he's already done it, and we're in.
He has.
So we're in the European Union, right?
Yeah,
and
we are at the moment,
and he's already done it.
Yes, because he foresaw the future.
Yes. So here's the question, Christine: Why do we have to leave to do something we could do while we were in it?
Because they're still controlling us. They've got no respect for this country. I've seen some of the things that have been going on.
Go on, tell me.
I love Britain. I love what it represents. I love what it gives to the rest of the world.
You've hated it since 1975, though.
Pardon?
You've hated it since 1975.
No, because we weren't so controlled then.
So what are the
controls come in?
So talk me through. Actually, no, I'm not going to let that go, Christine. I think you need to take on board what you've said on national radio.
Yes, I am taking on board.
You've
because
said
I was so furious when I was listening to it.
We have to leave the European Union because Tim Martin has done something while we were still in the European Union.
He did it because he prepared for us leaving, like a lot of other countries have done.
But how could he do it if we weren't allowed to do it because of all those controls?
Well, you'll have to get him on. I'm only going by what his magazine said.
But you must understand what you read. How could he do it if we're not allowed to do it?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a big businessman.
No, well...
But I was impressed with what he said.
But if you find 100 big businessmen, between 90 and 95 of them will tell you that we're making a terrible mistake. Why have you chosen to believe this businessman...
What about Mark Carney?
While not understanding what he's done?
Mark Carney has turned around. He was someone who said if we leave Europe, we're going to go down the ban. But he's changed now.
He hasn't changed.
From what I've heard on, has been reported on the radio.
Christine, again, he hasn't changed. And Mark Carney was the person the morning after the result who enacted economic policies specifically designed to minimise the impact of what he warned us against.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. I really do not agree with you.
Which bit don't you agree with, Christine? Which bit don't you agree with?
I don't agree with the fact that we are not going to be able to trade with the rest of the world.
But you just heard this morning from the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce for the UK. Of course, we'll still be able to trade, but it will cost us a lot more to do so, and we won't be able to trade freely come November the 1st with anybody. That's not an opinion, Christine. That's a matter of fact.
But haven't we heard a lot of things like this from a lot of these top people?
No.
And then they've turned round and said that this isn't going to happen and that's not going to happen.
Well, again, Christine, could you give me an example?
We were told
Yes.
tablets, pharmacy. We weren't going to get this. We weren't going to get that. But
Christine, we haven't left.
no, but they are able to source from other places.
Yes, but not under free trade agreements.
Well, I think. I'm sorry.
Why do you keep saying sorry?
Well, no. All right. I don't apologise for wanting to be a Brexiteer. I don't.
But what do you think that means?
Get out of Europe.
What I'm going to ask you again, back to the original question. Do you understand now why what you said about Tim Martin was a bit silly?
No.
Okay, let me try again. The things
you will not get me to say that. You will not get me to say that.
Okay, well, not silly then. But do you understand that he did the things you described?
He went and he sourced other places
while we were still in the European Union.
Well,
so he could have done that.
He made a vote to come out.
Yes, but we're still in. So anything he has.
At the moment we are.
Yes, and he's done this thing that you describe in such impressive terms. This thing he's done that convinces you it's right that we should leave. He did it while we were in.
Right. Okay. How come we source all our metal to China if we're not allowed trade agreements?
Pardon?
If we're not allowed trade agreements for the rest of the world...
No, who said we're not allowed trade agreements?
Well, that's what you said's going to happen.
No, I said on November the 1st we won't have any. And I'm not an expert on metal trading, but I'm pretty sure we don't trade freely with China.
Well,
that there are tariffs in place.
Yes, but it hasn't harmed us, has it?
Pardon?
It hasn't harmed us having trade agreements with China.
We don't have any trade. We don't have any trade agreements with China.
Well, I'm sorry.
Why do you keep saying sorry, Christine?
Because you're getting annoyed at what I'm saying.
I'm not remotely annoyed,
I'm sorry if I'm upsetting you.
I'm not even upset, Christine. I'm just. I think the word I would use is
frustrated.
No, I feel incredibly sorry for you.
Well, you don't have to.
No, I know I don't have to.
I'm a very strong person.
I'm sure you are, but
I know you don't have to feel sorry for me, and you don't have to feel sorry for a lot of people.
I know I don't have to. I choose to feel sorry for you because you have believed a farrago of lies, and you've come on the radio to explain that you voted for lots of people to lose their jobs because you lost yours.
No.
Yes.
No, I don't want people to lose their jobs, but
that's what's going to happen.
If we go forward, I'm sure that a lot of people will be proved wrong.
Right. But you realise these aren't opinions. These aren't November the 1st, we have no trade agreements. At the moment we have agreements with 120 different countries.
And where all in Europe?
But obviously not. The European Union has all sorts of trading agreements with countries outside the European Union, which is what we will be on November the 1st.
Well, I can't
what do you think's
going other people.
What do you think's going to get better?
We're going to have control of our country back.
What control of what, Christine? What's the thing we can't currently control that most frustrates you?
They've said a lot of different laws have had to change. I can't remember them now.
You must be able to name one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now this is a crazy one.
Yeah.
But we all used to have our fish and chips and newspaper. And then it was deemed it was wrong.
Right.
Now, when we had the fish and chips and newspaper, there wasn't loads of people went down with tummy upsets and things like that.
Okay.
It had a beautiful smell to it, and I can remember that smell now and how lovely it was.
Yeah.
But they decided, and this is a small
thing.
And
that was the EU, was it?
Yes, the EU.
Okay.
That was something they did. And I'm sorry, and I listened. I listened to the European Parliament, and I listened to some of the things they say should be done, shouldn't be done. I'll tell you what, we put billions into the Europe. Do you see the schools and the health service any better?
Well, better than 1975.
In the poorer countries.
Better than 1975.
Yes.
You think things now?
I would like to see them have decent schools and decent health.
Right.
But nothing's gone into that.
So taking away the money we pay into the European Union is going to make there less money available for the poorer member countries, Christine, not more.
Well, they haven't made it available up till now, have they?
Well, I'm afraid they have. I mean, it's so easy to establish where this money is spent. The European Development Fund in particular.
Because they love what we've got over here, and I don't blame them for coming over here.
Then why have you voted to get rid of it all then?
Because I just feel, as a patriotic person for this country, and I'm talking about all the different...
But patriotism involves wanting what's best for your country.
Yeah. And
you voted to make it worse.
No, I don't
You have?
think
Well,
I
tell
have.
me what's going to be better then, apart from... Possibly we'll be allowed to wrap our fish and chips in newspaper again. Apart from that, what are you most looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to maybe not having so much immigration into the country.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to having it controlled.
How did you feel when you found out that successive governments had chosen not to impose much stricter immigration regulations, that they would be free to do as members of the European Union, as, for example, Belgium does?
Well, I'm sorry.
Why are you sorry again?
I'm not sorry.
No.
I'm not sorry.
There's a sense that you know you should be, because you keep saying it, but just the thing...
It's just your...
But patriotism doesn't involve...
I should be guilty for things.
No, not at all.
I'm not guilty
I'm
for
giving
it.
you... Well, why... I mean, you think... Well, then you're not patriotic, are you? Because you voted to make everything worse.
No.
So what's going to get better?
Well, for a start...
Yes, apart from fish and chip paper.
No, for a start,
Yes.
we won't have such big lists on the National Health Service. That will probably start to...
What about all the doctors and nurses from the European Union who are already leaving? Who do you think is going to replace them?
I've already got in place plans for that.
You have?
Yes.
You've got plans in
Go back
place?
to the old way of nursing that I learned.
Okay. Christine,
And-
you take care, all right?
Okay, we will beg to disagree.
No, we haven't disagreed. I've told you some stuff that's true, and you've told me about fish and chips.
Well,
There's no
unfortunately,
disagreement.
70 years old, I'm not... I can't go back into all the different things that have upset me.
No,
over this,
just one would have done. I like fish and chips as well. I remember when it was wrapped in newspaper. I can't pretend I've ever felt it was a grave absence in the heart of British public life, but I would remind you, because I sense you use the word quite a lot, patriotism involves wanting your country to be the best it can be, not to impose economic sanctions on itself.
Just 5 years ago in 2019, though, if you're just tuning in and wondering what the hell happened, to have fallen down some sort of space-time vortex. I said all along, it's a curious mixture, isn't it, of hilarious and heartbreaking. Quite poignant, that. What do you think? Where do you think Christine is today? Do you think she thinks it's gone well? All the things that she said were going to happen, the opposite has happened. Immigration is higher, waiting lists are longer, country's poorer. What does a patriot do next? Nigel Farage says you just need to believe more. That's patriotism now, is about believing in fairies and unicorns rather than reality and facts. There's one line there, I didn't pick up on it at the time. I don't agree with the fact that. That could almost be the epitaph for Brexit, couldn't it? I don't agree with the fact, because, of course, for people like Christine and still many others, their feelings don't care about the facts, which is how we ended up where we have ended up 5 years on. 12:01 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Just to be clear, the EU didn't ban newspapers as a wrapping for fish and chips. It was an entirely independent decision, and I suppose it also falls to me to point out that they're still not wrapping them in newspapers now, 5 years after we left the European Union. Just a quick reminder of the person that I suppose we have to refer to as Banana Woman, although nowhere near as charming as Banana Man. This is another really good indication of how we've ended up where we've ended up, because this happened on Question Time. So this is someone politically engaged enough, in the same way that you've got to be relatively engaged to ring a show like mine. This is someone politically engaged enough to apply for tickets to sit in the Question Time audience. And this used to be funny when Rupert Murdoch's media first started lying about it. I think it's in my first book. It's in How to Be Right, the genesis of the bendy banana myths. But then this happens live-ish on national television on a programme that, again, should really have been in the business of providing people with the information they needed to make an informed choice in any vote or referendum or even election.
I was voting Remain, and at the very last minute I changed my decision and I went to Leave. And the reason because of that is because I go to a supermarket and a banana is straight. I'm just sick of the silly rules that come out of Europe. And
Have the bananas changed?
If you go to Aldi, they're a bit bent.
It was bananas, what did it, was it, for you?
No, it was more than bananas. It's the fact that there's opportunities out there that I feel that we need to see as a country.
And you're optimistic now? You're pleased the way you voted?
I am pleased the way I voted.
All right.
I wonder if she still is. And that people believed it. And you heard that. So, I mean, I don't know that it was right to make a joke out of it. I think that was a moment of quite serious import. There's people literally voting on the economic future of the country because they believed that bananas in their local supermarket were straight as a consequence of EU regulations. And some people still do. Including one of my texters' mums, who apparently still believe. I think Johnson might have been the first to file copy back to the Telegraph in London, telling lies about bananas. So if you were to track Boris Johnson's political career, it probably began when he started telling lies about bananas as the Brussels correspondent of the Daily Telegraph, and that just created this environment in which the lies take hold to the point where a member of the public can sit in the question time audience, and she sounded like a perfectly pleasant and intelligent lady, honestly believing that when she walked into her local supermarket and saw a banana that wasn't particularly bendy, it was not only a consequence of EU regulation, but also something that was being grounds for a reason to leave the biggest trading bloc in the world. It's a funny one, isn't it? How are you feeling? What are you feeling? It's nice. Company is pleasant always, but it is an odd one, isn't it? There's no going back, not anytime soon. Please don't kid yourself about that. We need campaigns, we need people to call for it, but it ain't ever going to happen for in the short term for one very, very simple reason, which I think some people possibly are still in denial about. There's no earthly way they'll take us back while our political landscape remains so unstable. That any prospect at all of the government after the government that takes us back in wanting to take us back out again, the European Union aren't going to go anywhere near it. That, I think, is probably where Keir Starmer is coming from when he talks about it never happening in my lifetime. But, of course, how much of the damage you can undo without full rejoining remains the greatest political challenge of our age. So, on one side, as always, in Brexit-related conversations, you've got the facts, you've got the difficult business of managing reality, and on the other, you've got Nigel Farage offering the entirely unachievable, pretending that just by believing, magic can happen. Is it in Peter Pan? I do believe in fairies. I do believe in fairies. Is that all right? Am I misremembering that? Am I imagining that? So we just mentioned Boris Johnson for the first time all day, which reminds me of the direction in which we should take the rest of this conversation today. Who'd have thought we'd get 3 hours out of this on the 5th anniversary? It was Boris Johnson's sister, actually, Rachel, who told me yesterday it was the 5th anniversary. Having marking the 20th anniversary in the company of one of my favourite colleagues. And Rachel, what are you going to be doing tomorrow? Rachel said, it's the 5th anniversary of... I said, is it really? Good grief. She'll be with you, I think, at 7 o'clock this evening, won't she? No doubt. Also, reflecting upon 5 years. But Boris Johnson, interesting that his name hadn't appeared thus far in the conversation. And David Cameron. If you really dug into this, when historians of the future do, when, as is still not the case, it is just accepted as historical fact that it was a bloody stupid thing to do. Still not the case. You've got there is a good Brexit, but it went to a different school. You've got that, no, it will still be brilliant if only you believe more. We've been let down by so-and-so and so-and-so, Boris Johnson and Theresa May and all the rest of them, or whatever it may be. Just the delusional. Still there. But once it is almost universally accepted that it was a really stupid thing to do, and historians charge themselves with identifying the guilty men and women, I increasingly, when I was working on How They Broke Britain, I really came to think that David Cameron was much more prominent on that chart than some of the people that actually campaigned to leave. The sort of cowardly nature of the decision to offer a referendum, the cynical calculation that it would protect him from the populist nativist threat, and that I probably won't have to do it anyway because we're going to lose the next election, aren't we, to Ed Miliband. So what I'll do, I'll cut UKIP off at the knees by saying that we'll have a referendum, then we'll lose the election. But of course, he ended up winning it without the coalition. So he thought he'd win it. Well, either he thought he'd lose or he thought he'd still be in coalition. That's the calculation. Didn't think that he would have an overall majority and therefore have to deliver on the manifesto pledge to have a referendum. Otherwise, he could have said, well, in order to keep Nick Clegg on side, in order to keep the coalition together, I have had to, sadly, put on ice for the time being the promise to have a referendum. Listening to Christine in Southampton, it's a very uncharitable thought, but if I include myself in the category of people who were supremely unqualified to vote in that referendum, what the hell was he thinking? What on earth was he thinking by putting a decision like that in the hands of people like us? Like us. And of course, you can't mention, we're playing too many clips today, but it's fun, isn't it? And I know what you're thinking about. I know what clip you're thinking about. In fact, I need to have a private conversation with the producer. So if you could just look away for a moment. Is it bleeped? It's definitely bleeped because it's me that, it's, yeah, all right. David Cameron, eh?
Going back to this whole Brexit thing, when you're judging them on Brexit, they don't know nothing about it. Who knows about Brexit?
Yeah, quite.
No one's got a clue what Brexit is, yeah? You watch Question Time, it's comedy.
Were you no clearer when Jeremy Corbyn explained
No, I ain't got
Labour's
the clue.
policy?
No one knows what it is. It's like this mad riddle that no one knows what it is, right? So what's happened to that David Cameron who called it on? Let's be fair.
Oh.
I think you're referring to our former Prime Minister.
Yeah, but how comes he can scuttle off? He called all this on.
Yeah.
Yeah?
He has no regrets.
Where is he? He's in Europe, in Nice, with his trotters up. Yeah? Where is the geezer? I think he should be held accountable for it. He should be held accountable for it.
It's a valid point. A lot of people do feel that...
He just came back for the second one. Oh, dear. But, and Danny Dyer obviously has a very particular way of expressing himself. That was a more astute analysis than anyone writing comment pieces for the Daily Telegraph today. David Cameron called this on. That's still missing. Well, largely because an awful lot of the right-wing media is still pretending that it wasn't a bloody disaster. But that line there, it's like a mad riddle. That was a more acute analysis than anybody working on this radio station who told you that Brexit would be a good idea. Danny Dyer, people think, because he talks in the way that he talks, that maybe he's not very clever or something. That was absolutely genius political analysis. He identified precisely the problem and he identified precisely the source. It's a mad riddle and David Cameron called it on. And, of course, Rishi Sunak brought him back, stuck him in the House of Lords and made him Foreign Secretary. Where are all the awards and rewards for people who've been proved right by events? Where's my knighthood? Weird, right? And admittedly, I don't think I'd make a very good columnist in the Daily Mail, but they have all been proved wrong. Well, funny. And that's why my last book was called How They Broke Britain, because this isn't just about Brexit. This is the idea that you promote absolute puddings like David Frost and Daniel Hannan and Zach Goldsmith into the House of Lords as rewards for being rubbish and wrong and either dishonest or stupid or both. And that's a legacy that we're still living with. Sat in France with his trotters up. What a poet. What a poet. So... we haven't had much room on the switchboard today for Remainers, as of course we used to be called, and I will change that now. Where do you put the blame? So either individuals, institutions, or factors? So Corbyn, Cameron, the bus. Have we mentioned Cummings yet today? Have we mentioned Dominic Cummings yet today? Who for you is the single Farage? We've mentioned quite a lot. Who or what do you think is most responsible for this mess? And you can dispute that it's a mess, but it's something that 90% of the population kind of recognise as being a failure. Even one in... So the simple question, what do you think the biggest factor was? Either a person, an idea, an item of propaganda, the single biggest thing that pushed it over the line to the point where now you would have to be on drugs or on the payroll of the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Express to pretend that it hadn't been an unqualified disaster. I give you David Cameron. I suggest cautiously he is the guiltiest man of all. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Who would you anoint as the worst offender, or what single factor do you think swung it? It is 12:17. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What do you think it was? Where do you think it lies? The most responsibility lies. Don't be unkind, please, but feel free to name and shame actual public figures, actual individuals. 12:17 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 12. I will always blame, let me get these right, Jeremy Corbyn, writes Ollie, when people from all sides of the aisle made it about Britain, he made it about himself. Aidan says if Cameron was intelligent enough, he could have put conditions on the result of the referendum, like all nations that make up the UK must vote over 50% for us to accept the outcome. Thresholds, an interesting point, actually. I think that if Cameron wasn't so insulated by his class, really, and his party, the notion of not only the idiocy of offering us a vote on it, but also the terms of the vote, an act of extraordinary incompetence. So he's sort of edging ahead for me. But don't forget, we can also have slogans. So maybe Project Fear was the most effective tool in the arsenal of tools. Maybe Project Fear was the thing that worked best, because you kind of heard that with Christine, and I just read one of the most powerful messages I've ever been sent. It's by Amos. He said, listening again to the fish and chip lady on LBC, I actually found it really sad. It wasn't sovereignty she wanted back. It was youth. I got a little shiver down my spine when I read that, because, I think it's true. That smell of fish and chips from childhood, it's redolent, right? I want to feel like I did then. It wasn't the EU that had taken that away. It was old Father Time. So that Project Fear line meant that people who, I'm not going to mince my words, people who didn't understand much and didn't put any effort into understanding more, every single time they were presented with something that took away the waft of fish and chips from beneath their nostrils, or the sweet, sweet smell of sovereignty, every time people were presented with facts, they could just shout Project Fear. And of course, the disgusting people were, the ones in power, prominent positions in the media or in politics, who introduced the phrase into the national vocabulary and used to shout it themselves. And I think the thing I'm taking away most from today, and I knew already, but I hadn't counted, is how many of them ended up with gongs and honours and seats in the House of Lords, knighthoods and damehoods. That's such a dangerous thing for a country to have done, to have actually honoured incompetence and liars, to have created a country in which being an incompetent liar sees you showered with the greatest honours a country can bestow. That's mostly on Johnson, but I don't see Johnson. Well, do I? Well, I'll stop telling you what I think and start finding out what you think. Jennifer is in Fairhurst. Jennifer, what would you like to say? Fernhurst, even. What would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
a first-time caller, so forgive any nerves.
Well, don't you worry.
I'm with you on Cameron. I actually, the 100% instigator of all of this, of course, is Farage and UKIP, and forced Cameron's hand. And Cameron responded, I felt, arrogantly, out of touch and weakly. And I feel actually, quite importantly, the structure of the referendum, arguably,
it gets overlooked.
Binary. Yeah, it was polarised, black, white, in, out. And I feel it should have been in, out, or stay in with reform, which I think an awful lot of people would have voted for.
It wasn't a great deal, because he'd kind of shot that fox by going there claiming he'd be able to come back with big. We already had the best available arrangement, and no one was prepared to say that. I think that's a bigger problem. But I take your point about about the terms of it. I like that line there about every nation in the United Kingdom has to deliver a majority for it to go over the line.
Well, I feel so, because look at the issue with Northern Ireland.
Precisely.
And, they literally didn't even think it through at all. And I have personal friends, very close friends, who voted out, couldn't believe it. And when you sort of say, well, what about Northern Ireland? Oh, they'll sort it out. It'll all be sorted out. Well...
Don't you worry. I think someone said that to me. Don't you worry about Northern Ireland.
I know.
Everything will be fine. It's not as if it's a particularly troubled area, is it? It's not going to be any...
They're literally as schoolboys. They were like a pack of literal Etonian schoolboys, and I just feel that they've got this master of the universe syndrome, that they feel a sense of entitlement and elitism, and I think that also colours judgment, and I think they were hideously out of touch, and I think Project Fear set in because he suddenly went, oh gosh, this is, not maybe possibly going to go the way I thought, and then Boris, of course, jumps on the bandwagon. And he's an orator, and whether you like, he's Marmite. And
he's an opportunist more than an orator,
absolutely.
I think. And calculating in a Trumpian fashion what would be best for him as opposed to the country. But interesting that someone who voted to remain, we both feel at this point, and it's only 12:24, we're here till 1, we both feel probably carries more can for this catastrophe than anybody who voted to leave.
Cameron, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the absolute irony of irony is Rishi deciding in his infinite wisdom to make him actual foreign secretary.
Well, I don't want to sound like I'm name dropping, but I was chatting to some very influential people yesterday, and they didn't have such a problem with that because he apparently is he's much better thought of outside the United Kingdom than he is in it. So in the context of trying to undo some of the damage that we'd done by going down this insane path, the appointment of Cameron in isolation, it was arguably not the silliest thing that Rishi Sunak ever did. But I mean, who cares, frankly, because these are sort of deck chair rearrangements on the deck of the Titanic type moments. Jennifer, thank you. A sparkling debut. I look forward to your second call to the programme. It's funny, isn't it, how our country works? David, Lord Cameron to you. Baron Cameron, probably, of, I don't know, Whitney. Baron Cameron of Whitney. So all of these people. In fact, it might be worth going through all of the people that got their own chapters in how they broke Britain and remembering how many of them have actually ended up being honoured or rewarded. Murdoch doesn't get any honours because he's not even a British citizen, but quite a few of you are mentioning him in the text as the people or the projects most responsible. 26 minutes after 12 is the time. Chloe is in Richmond. Chloe, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
I would just like you to thank you for raising my blood pressure again. It had lowered a bit after yesterday.
It's nice blood pressure, though. It's bouncy. Let's call it bouncy blood pressure.
After yesterday, I was bouncing off the ceilings. I'm with you. I blame Cameron because I used a much less word. It began with weasel. Sorry, I nearly said it then.
Go on.
It began with W and ended L with an S in the middle of it. He did it for his own political expediency, and he didn't even show statecraft in terms of like the way he set up the referendum, and the binary in-out thing, and without any vision of what the deal would look like.
I didn't realise that at the time. Not defending him, but these are not criticisms I had at the time. It's only hindsight that gives us.
I did feel that. That he was doing it for his own political expediency.
Oh no, that bit was true, but the setup of the referendum, I didn't see it at the time as flawed.
But then also, not allowing a second referendum or a referendum on the actual deal in place, because that I think when people actually realised what it would look like. I mean, at the time it was so slippery. Any argument you had, I even had an argument with a member of my family about why we needed trade deals. So many people didn't understand the whole systemic issue, how the whole thing knitted together. Yeah. And they would just rely on, everybody says, I knew exactly what I was doing, but they were voting for their own version of it.
None of which existed. I wonder if there's anybody who could say, I got exactly what I wanted. This is exactly what I wanted. And if there is, it's someone who's describing feelings rather than actual facts.
Yeah.
And so Cameron is streaking ahead, and there's nothing.
I do have a little side note for Mr. Johnson.
Yes, of course.
Which is, I heard him say that he wanted to prove a point he won the election, the referendum, because he wanted to prove a point.
Yeah.
And that made me feel sick when I heard him say that.
Well, they play with the country like the rest of us play
like
Scrabble.
Their own little kind of, board game.
And they still do, of course, see it like that. They see it as Rees-Mogg in particular. It's not a coincidence that they all went to the same school, but at risk of sounding like a complete wombat, going to that school does not make you into the kind of characters that we're examining here. And Cameron probably previously you wouldn't have lumped him in with Johnson or Rees-Mogg, not least because he was on the other side of the argument. But what Chloe's just identified, that weapons grade sense of entitlement. Do you know what he said when they asked him, why do you want to be Prime Minister? God, this is such a weird show, isn't it? It's a bit, it's like, but he said, I think I'll be rather good at it. I think I'll be rather good at it. What? Why do you want to be Prime Minister? Because I think I'll be rather good at it. Because it's commensurate. This isn't what he said. This is me trying to unpick his words. It's commensurate with my concept of my own importance and my own skills. I think Prime Minister is pretty much the only job that befits someone of my brilliance and stature. How did it work out for you, Dave? Tim Humphries here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. I haven't mentioned the media, maybe because it's too obvious, but decades, and Boris Johnson, of course, the instigator of it in many ways, of just complete misrepresentation and misinformation about what the European Union was and what the European Union did, being filed back to hungry news editors in London by people like Johnson. That there is I get my books mixed up sometimes in my own head, but there is an account from one of Johnson's colleagues at the time in How They Broke Britain that describes how he must have known, and lots of other people must have known, that he was writing nonsense, but it was good for business. So there's an early sign there of the direction of travel that we've been taken in as a country. And don't forget that Donald Trump very much cited Brexit as an example of what could be achieved. And he was absolutely right as an example of what could be achieved if enough people believed enough nonsense. And knowing it was nonsense but continuing to print it lies at the feet of the Daily Telegraph editor at the time, which I think was Max Hastings, who subsequently came out very much critical of Johnson when his political career began to gather pace, but I always felt that was a little bit too easy for him. You shouldn't have published his bilge and then complain when his bilge assumes a momentum that could carry him all the way to Downing Street. Just looking at the blame game. It's fun, isn't it? In a very bittersweet kind of way. Douglas is in St Albans. Douglas, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
So a little bit
Thank you.
fluttery of heart.
It's only me. It's only me.
Yeah. So I think it's Corbyn's fault, to answer your question. Corbyn and the left. But to kind of highlight, I completely agree with you. And I'll just put your audience onto someone that can say a lot better than I. But Stephen Fry. Just look up the rise of the right is the left's fault, and it is basically. I just think they didn't fight enough. I think they thought. Probably they were too incredulous, thought this could not possibly...
I think it's worse than that. I think Corbyn wanted to leave, but I didn't. He was held hostage by the leadership he held of the Labour Party, so he had to surrender one. He either had to pretend that he didn't want to leave, or he had to resign as leader of the Labour Party because the party was very much against the idea of leaving, and he kind of tried to have his cake and eat it, and ended up being utterly useless.
That seems absolutely mad because it just needed a bit of backbone. Somebody saying this is stupid.
You needed one rallying point. You needed one person, and some emerged after the result. But I think it was Stuart Rose, head of the Remain campaign. I can't even remember.
I don't even know that name.
No, there was no rallying point. There was no sort of and if there had been, maybe we're being a bit naive retrospectively, they probably would have been buried under a ton of Project Fear bricks, but it would have been nice for someone to really take up the mantle, because Cameron didn't and could have done. Corbyn didn't, probably couldn't have done. Cameron probably wasn't sufficiently committed to remaining. Alan Johnson was in charge of Labour's campaign, Lee thinks. I don't know if that's true. There was no one there, was there, who just sort of felt like a leader? Like a leader. Where's the leader?
We need somebody now to kind of just pick up and say, look, we don't have any harmful, we don't have any hate in us. We just want to tell you that, this is probably not the best thing we've ever done, and we need to try and do what is smart for our country, and we're all trying to do the best. I've had so many conversations. I worked in hospitality, and I used to talk to so many different people with varying different ideologies, and I always sit down. I'm quite a big fan of philosophy and anthropology, and you just spend a few minutes, 5, 10, 15 minutes with somebody, and see how their mind changes after just talking to them just openly and saying, look, kind of asking them why they feel the way they feel. And you do it brilliantly, James. I'm a huge fan. I think you're brilliant at teasing these things out and trying to kind of get people to hang themselves with their own rope in many
or not sometimes. But I take your point.
Well,
it's a courtesy. It's respectful to ask people to explain the thinking behind their position, and it is sometimes the case that it turns out there isn't any. But you can't hold that against ordinary people or people who ring into a radio phone when you've got people writing columns for the Daily Mail and sitting in the House of Lords who are possessed of identical worldviews. You ask Nadine Dorries to explain why she thought Brexit would be a good idea. You'd have to pick up the word salad from Asda. I mean, it would be unthinkable. But here we are. There it goes. So you're putting Corbyn at the top of the list because
he was the head of the opposition. He wasn't. I mean, far be it for me to defend Jeremy Corbyn, but he and I think he bears a lot of responsibility. But David Cameron was on the same side, and yet Corbyn, you come back and say Corbyn refused to share a podium with David Cameron. That's so childish, isn't it? For shock value, but it's the left. The left just didn't speak up enough. And if it was with too much vitriol of how could you possibly be so stupid as to do this, which would just turn other people off, immediately and make them want to vote.
Condescending. He's calling you a racist. He's condescending to. He's really not. He's just asking you to explain but it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, as Dominic Raab did on this radio station about me. You can just say it, and then people go, "Oh yeah, exactly." I'm not a racist. I didn't say you were. I just said that the thing you think you're voting for is never going to happen. It doesn't exist, and we're still there. 12:39 is the time. Amazing how many people in my line of work have tried to sort of go quiet about it, or tried to sort of say, no one wants to talk about that anymore. Well, if Farage is trying to resurrect it on the front page of today's Daily Express, and they spend much of their time professionally tickling his toes, it'll be interesting to see whether they can cling to the idea that it's something that we shouldn't be talking about anymore. I never thought you won, get over it, would become a mantra for this country, but it kind of did. Douglas, well done. Great debut. 12:39 is the time. Mike's in Clevedon. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Another first-time caller. Couldn't agree with your previous caller more if I tried. By the way, with Farage being on the front page of the Express, didn't he say that if it was a disaster, he would leave the country?
How dare you? How dare you even imply that the man is dishonesty personified? But Absolutely. Yes, he did. He said if Brexit was a failure, he'd leave the country. In his defence, he didn't say when. So, as long as the Brexit that is brilliant but goes to a different school survives, I suppose he could say it hasn't completely failed yet. But yeah, you're right. You remember.
So for me, the person who deserves the most scorn here is Johnson. He lied and lied through his back teeth. I remember him being interviewed on the battle bus going round, saying many, many different things and being challenged on them and insisting that he was telling the truth. He knew he wasn't. Yeah. But James, I've got a challenge for you.
Go on.
We're all talking about this today. Obviously, the
fifth
anniversary. What are we going to do to get out of it? So we've got people like you, Vorderman, the brilliant Ian Dunt, Linsky, Rory Stewart, Alistair Campbell. How do we put together something that can take us forward and get us out of the mess that we're in? Because I'm a Lib Dem supporter. I don't care about politics. This is bigger than that, and we need to find a way to get ourselves out of this mess.
Well, there's no politicians on that list. We're all commentators now. I don't mean that in an existential. We're all commentators now. It sounded like a sort of plaintive. So, unfortunately, the job of improving things lies with your lot, or the Labour Party, who are proving a little bit cowardly in the context of things. And I don't know that the job is the job of people, chroniclers and describers of the mess, come up with ways of fixing it. I did write a whole book about it, and the first thing that you do is stop giving so much airtime to clowns and charlatans like Farage. But it's the same as Boris Johnson sending stories about bananas back from Brussels. The reason why he's in the Daily Telegraph today is because their dwindling band of readers like it. So, amplifying the lies, resurrecting the nonsense is good for business. And I don't know what the antidote to that is. If we're going to accept the necessity of them pursuing pounds rather than principles. It's there. But I'll carry on doing what I'm doing if you carry on doing what you're doing, Mike.
Absolutely. I'm coming to your show on Tuesday the 10th, is it?
Monday the 10th.
Monday the 10th, yeah. I've got tickets for that and I've read both the books.
Well, we'll see you there. We'll see you there. I'm looking forward to that. I think there are 9 tickets left for that event, or there were at 10 o'clock this morning, referring to me interviewing Carol. And listen, I mean, Carol is wonderful, but she can't single-handedly steer the United Kingdom back onto a course where corruption is no longer possible. But we will be talking about that and talking about all sorts of things on stage at the Leicester Square Theatre on Monday, the 10th of February, which is a week on Monday. And I'm not here next week. And quite possibly I'm not here the week after either. Only time will tell. But I will be on stage in Leicester Square on Monday, the 10th of February. You can get your tickets at makesomenoise.com because it is entirely a fundraising exercise for Make Some Noise, Global's charity, which looks after lots and lots of little charities that are dedicated to making sure that anybody who needs help can get it. And also go to Leicester Square Theatre website. But makesomenoise.com is probably the easiest thing to do off the top of your head. A few tickets remaining. 12:43 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's amazing. Listen, my inbox isn't exactly full of it, but the idea that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't deserve criticism for his role in the delivery of Brexit is, almost unthinkable. How could anybody possibly conclude? But here's a message. He did many speeches, etc., but the media didn't feature them. Okay, yeah, that's about as far from observable reality as it's possible to get without borrowing one of Elon Musk's space rockets. Catherine is in Leeds. Catherine, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Catherine.
I absolutely loved the show and I loved your book.
Well, this is turning into a rather pleasant Friday, isn't it, Catherine? But thank you. And to the question of what you don't love, to the question of who we think is
what
most...
What I don't love is Brexit, and I hold David Cameron on 2 counts.
Yes.
Totally responsible.
Go on.
The first count is that David Cameron arrogantly decided to put his party before the country.
Yeah.
He wanted to quieten down the Eurosceptics and put it to bed by putting something in, like a referendum, to which he didn't know what was going to happen, which was really...
Reckless, really sort of nation-damaging recklessness.
I agree.
It's a good word, reckless.
But secondly... the 2 variables of leave and remain are not equally weighted. When any organisation has to decide between the status quo or changes, it requires a 2/3 majority. And frankly, to make it 50-50 was just ridiculous. Catherine, because you clearly listen to the programme a lot, I couldn't have a higher regard for my listeners and my callers. And it's really interesting how many people are picking up on the rubric of the referendum, not just the recklessness of calling it, but the recklessness of making it so binary and so simplistic almost, without looking at things like what happens if Northern Ireland votes to remain, but the rest of the or Scotland votes to remain and England votes to leave. What are we going to do? The lady who said that, I thought she was spot on.
And that these should have been in the minds of the people responsible for presenting the country with these choices. Or, as you say, a threshold more than 51-point-something% versus 48-point-something.
It's always 2/3 because you need an emphatic rationale for all the work that comes with the change inherent and, of course, the complexity of 45 years in the EU or the common market originally. It was unbelievable. And at the time, it did resonate with me because I've been in a boardroom where basically any change requires a 2/3 majority.
Yes.
And I just find it, well, the word reckless is a good one, as you've said, but actually... It was an incompetence on their part.
Or cowardice, because the more I think about it, the more I wonder whether we should have mentioned Paul Dacre sooner, the editor of the Daily Mail throughout this period of national fever dream. And if Cameron had put something in place like that, even if it was 60-40, I wonder whether the then editor of the Daily Mail, who wielded enormous influence, would have emptied a bucket of manure over his head. So Cameron would have been frightened of the reaction from the Daily Mail to do what you described.
I had to ask myself at the start of all this, when it was first mooted, well, Putin wants us to leave. Murdoch wants us to leave. Seemingly Trump wants us to. What do I have in common with these autocratic people who only want to deregulate and make life harder for people? Of course, they made trillions from it. I'm not saying Putin, but Putin wanted a weaker Europe. But my feeling is that lies were told, and of course Johnson takes a lot of the blame for that. Frankly, it all began with the cowardice and incompetence of David Cameron.
The cowardice and incompetence of David Cameron. It sounds like a sentence. Beautifully put, Catherine. The cowardice and incompetence of David Cameron, who, like almost everybody else on this charge sheet, is now in the House of Lords. And the ones that aren't in the House of Lords have got knighthoods or damehoods. That's a mad thing for a country to have done to itself, to undertake a path of reckless self-harm and then reward the architects. Catherine, thank you. It's 12:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:51, and it's, uncomfortable listening today for David Cameron. And I understand why. He seems to be head and shoulders above all other contenders on the question of who is most responsible for the mess that Brexit has become. But I'm afraid he can't be held on the hook for telling people that it would be a good thing. So the in terms of the biggest liars, the list writes itself, really, doesn't it? And again, I have to be clear. I can't say for certain that these people were lying. It's possible that they were just not very bright and didn't understand any of the things that they were selling. Those clips of Jacob Rees-Mogg that I played out in the first hour of the programme were stunning for two reasons. Number one, how events have proved him to be completely wrong about everything. And number two, the arrogant confidence with which he shared his nonsense. You know, that sort of condescending patrician drawl. You're trying to get a zinger for the adverts or something, instead of actually acknowledging that he couldn't answer the question he was being asked. And that was when he was trying to defend the idea of going out into the world without any trade agreements whatsoever on the WTO front. Madness. Absolute madness. And here we are 5 years later, with almost everybody agreed that it's been a disaster, and the only debate remaining about whether or not it was inevitable or not. Spoiler alert, it was. Mark's in Torquay. Mark, what would you like to say?
My choice is a bit left field, this one, and you may not understand it, but I do have reasons.
Go on.
My choice is George Osborne.
Okay. Good God, if you put me in a position where I have to defend George Osborne, I'm going to ban you from the programme for life. Go on, tell me why.
Okay, two reasons.
Yeah.
One, he was the architect of austerity, and I know lots of Leavers, and I was trying to persuade them in the run-up to 2016, and he basically gave us the bedroom tax. He smashed up the public sector, and everything to do with austerity, and the child benefit changes, which was what affected my friend's decision, and she was very much of the opinion, come the referendum, I just want to kick the government. How much worse can it be? They've already taken all my benefits off me.
How interesting.
And then he gave us the predictions, the punishment budget. He said there'd be 3 million unemployed within months, and he basically gave Leavers the excuse to come up with the phrase Project Fear.
You think he fed Project Fear more than anybody else?
Yeah. Yeah,
I hadn't thought of that before. Because he was opposed to the idea of the referendum. That's why I was going to defend him. Is that it was something that him and Cameron disagreed about. But you started with austerity, which should be very near the top of the list. And that early caller that we played out talking about, I wanted to slap the government in the face. And I don't think that cohort of voters thought they were going to win. They wanted to send a message to Downing Street that we're not very happy with the way things are going, but we don't actually necessarily want to leave the European Union. There was a story, it might have been apocryphal, about the number of people that were Googling it the next day to find out what it was they'd actually voted for. But yeah, so I think without austerity, there would have been no Brexit. I think you're right.
No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Because it harnessed, what they were able to do was harness that sense of, well, it can't get any worse, so we might as well blow it up, and see what happens.
The whole reason Johnson was able to come up with Project Fear was because of Osborne, because nobody believed him. Everybody knew he was talking rubbish.
He reached too far.
Yeah.
So, or you could have just concentrated on the things that were provable, and they could still have shouted Project Fear, but it wouldn't have sounded like oh, that's interesting. All right, I'm putting him on the list. George Osborne. You're not putting him above everybody else, are you? Or,
No. I still think Cameron, Corbyn, Vlad.
Paul Dacre, editor of that, Rupert Murdoch, Nigel Farage. That list is endless. But you're right. It's not so much left field as involving a little bit more thinking than going for some of the obvious suspects. And George Osborne, you're right. So it doesn't matter that he was opposed to the whole idea. In the context of how it happened, you're right. His fingerprints are all over austerity, and austerity was a massive driver of a sort of unspecific dissatisfaction that can be harnessed by bad actors into a vote for economic sanctions on yourself. Thank you, Mark. But staying at the seaside from Torquay to Brighton. Bob's in Brighton. What would you like to say, Bob?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Afternoon. So I think that all the names you've had on this morning are good, but I think that it's more like a line of dominoes rather than any one person.
I think you're probably right.
Dominoes falling often not in the best interest of the country, but for their own different reasons.
Johnson, if anybody got to flick the first domino, it would probably be the journalism Boris Johnson did when he was in Brussels. But yeah, you're right. You can't pin it all on anyone more than several other people, can you?
There's one name I'd like to add, though, which hasn't come up this morning, I don't think, and that's Theresa May.
Ah, yes, of course. Which, again, like George Osborne, they were opposed to Brexit. So how can they be... Well, David Cameron was as well. How can they be most responsible for the catastrophe that's followed? And she... Well, you tell me why she's on the list.
Well, the main reason is triggering Article 50.
Yeah.
Suddenly, and we had a context of huge misinformation, a very narrowly split national vote. It wasn't it wasn't a mandate for a huge change. Lots of difficult issues hadn't been resolved, and what we needed was time and space. And she gave us a ticking clock in Article 50, and she didn't do it for the benefit of the country.
And that. Of course, that enforced timetable made everything worse. There were no advantages to that except in short-term partisan gains for her, because she thought that it would keep the dogs chomping at her heels from within her own party at bay for a little bit longer. That didn't exactly work out well. And then I'd add the red lines, and that was Nick Timothy, someone else who writes columns for the Daily Telegraph. David Davis did get a knighthood, I checked. Did Nick Timothy get any? No, he's in the House of Commons now, so he's an MP. And he was advising Theresa May at the time of those red lines, when they kind of figured that if we don't actually abolish freedom of movement, then all bets are off. And of course, the minute that you pledge to abolish freedom of movement, you're also pulling out of anything close to a customs union or a single market. And the path that we ended up on as a consequence of those two decisions, I think, led inevitably to where we are today. So, yeah, I mean, it feels a bit unkind to her, because you could argue that she did her best in a very, very difficult situation, but her best wasn't good enough.
I think she nominated herself, put herself forward, says, this is my moment, I'm going to be the leader. And I thought, as a Remain voter, a Remain supporting Tory leader might be exactly the moderate voice we need to get us a pragmatic but yet democratic solution to what we've ended up with.
And then she got overtaken by self-interest, and that then became about protecting herself rather than protecting herself from Boris Johnson, rather than protecting the country from Brexit. And of course, what we ended up with was Boris Johnson's Brexit, which is the worst of all imaginable worlds. Yeah, well played, Bob. I like it. A late entry. Can't let Michael Gove off the hook just for being Michael Gove, so he goes on the list. And Dominic Cummings, of course, whose role is not exaggerated in this, but whose cunning is probably underestimated slightly. People perceive him as a genius. He was just a different brand of snake oil salesman who used words like physicist when really he was just talking about paying huge sums of money to infect your Auntie Doris's Facebook page with absolute bilge about what leaving the European Union would do to her weight for a new hip. And that's it from me for another. That was weird. 3 hours. Could you carry on?
It was weird listening to it as well.
I bet it was. It's
We
like
were like, is this then or now? Is this then or now?
Time Tunnel. With James O'Brien's Time Tunnel. When we do the next one? 10 years? I don't know. If you missed any of it, you can listen back to all of it on Global Player, where you can pause and rewind live radio as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of my show in 60 minutes every day. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Remember, I'm not here next week, so and quite possibly not the week after either, so do be nice to Lewis Goodall, who I'm delighted to say will be standing in for me. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4 on LBC, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.